Welcome back to the channel and welcome to part 11 of the series that has become the most complete cat care resource on this platform. If you have been with us since part 1, you have already worked through over 100 comparisons covering everything from indoor versus outdoor living to multi-cat household dynamics. If you are new here, you do not need to have watched every previous part to get value from this one. But I will tell you honestly that the earlier videos in this series are linked below, and they build a foundation that makes everything here even more useful. Today we are doing something a little different, 15 comparisons instead of 10. And one of them, the one we are opening with, is the topic our audience has asked for more than any other single subject on this channel, male versus female cats. Not as a quick aside buried in a longer list like it was back in part 1, but as its own complete dedicated comparison built specifically to answer the question so many of you keep asking in the comments. Should I adopt a male cat or a female cat? Does it actually matter? And if it does matter, what exactly should you expect to be different? We are going to answer that properly, not with recycled talking points, but with a fresh look at what the differences actually mean for your daily life, your household, and the specific situation you are in right now. But that is only the first of 15 decisions we are covering today. Because cat ownership does not stop mattering once you have the basics handled. There are decisions that come later. Decisions about whether your cat is better suited to a household with one dedicated person or a busy family. Decisions about whether a rescue cat with an unknown history is the right fit compared to raising a kitten from birth. Decisions about what happens to your cat's daily rhythm when you work from home every day versus when you are gone from morning until evening. Decisions about preparing your home before a new baby arrives instead of scrambling to adjust after the fact. We are also going deeper into the tools and technology that have become part of modern cat ownership. Automated litter boxes that promise to save you time and reduce odor. Calming diffusers and supplements that promise to reduce anxiety. Cat wheels and puzzle feeder circuits that promise more mental stimulation than a simple toy ever could. Some of these products deliver on their promises. Some of them are solving a problem you do not actually have. And some of them are solving the right problem in the wrong way. We are going to tell you which is which, based on what the evidence actually shows, not based on what the packaging claims. And then there are the situations that catch cat owners off guard because nobody warned them in advance. What happens to your cat's coat and behavior when the seasons change, and whether your grooming routine needs to change with it. What actually happens when you move to a new house, and whether the slow, room-by-room introduction that experts recommend for new cats also applies to cats who are already yours but are now in an unfamiliar space. What the right approach is when you need to travel and you are choosing between a boarding facility and an in-home pet sitter. Two options that sound similar on the surface, but that suit very different cats for very different reasons. We are covering foster-to-adopt programs versus direct adoption and what each path actually means for a cat's adjustment period. We are covering harness walking versus catio-only outdoor access, two ways of giving your indoor cat safe exposure to the outside world that come with very different trade-offs. And we are covering pet insurance again, but from an angle we have not addressed before, wellness add-ons versus basic accident and illness coverage. Because the insurance decision is not a one-time choice, it evolves as your cat ages. 15 comparisons, real differences that matter. No filler, no comparisons included just to hit a number, and no recycled content from anything we have covered before. Every single one of these is either a brand new topic or a genuinely new angle on something we have only touched on in passing. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe, because we publish content like this every week. And if you have been here since part 1, thank you for sticking with us through over 100 comparisons already. This next batch might be the most practically useful set yet, starting with the one you have been asking for. Let's get into it. Let's start with the question that brings more people into the comments section of this channel than almost anything else. Should you adopt a male cat or a female cat? And before we go any further, I want to be completely honest with you about something. Individual personality will always outweigh sex as a predictor of how any specific cat behaves. You can find a female cat who is an absolute Velcro cat following you from room to room, sleeping curled against your chest every single night. You can find a male cat who wants nothing to do with cuddling and prefers watching the world from a windowsill 3 feet away from you. Genetics, early socialization, and individual temperament matter more than sex alone ever will. But here is what the research and the aggregated behavioral data actually show. When you look across large populations of cats rather than individual anecdotes, real statistical tendencies emerge between males and females. These tendencies are not destiny, they are probabilities. And understanding probabilities is exactly how you make a smart adoption decision when you are standing in a shelter looking at 2 cats and you have to choose one. Let's start with affection style, because this is where the differences show up most consistently in behavioral studies. Male cats, particularly neutered male cats, tend to display affection in a more straightforward, uncomplicated way. They will approach you directly. They will flop down next to you without much preamble. They tend to be less selective about who in the household receives their attention, often bonding warmly with every member of the family rather than fixating on one person. Female cats tend to be more selective. They often form a stronger primary bond with one specific person, and their affection tends to be offered on their terms rather than yours. A female cat is more likely to walk away mid-pet than a male cat is, and she is also more likely to come find you specifically for attention, rather than accepting affection whenever it is offered. Neither pattern is better. It depends entirely on what you are looking for. If you want a cat who greets every guest in your home with the same warmth, who does not seem to notice or care which family member is doing the petting, a male cat statistically leans in that direction. If you want a deep, specific one-on-one bond with a cat who chooses you and shows it in small, deliberate gestures, a female cat statistically leans in that direction. Now let's talk about energy and play style, because this is another area where the data consistently shows a difference. Male cats tend to maintain playful, kitten-like energy further into adulthood. It is common for a 5 or 6-year-old neutered male to still enjoy chasing a wand toy with the same enthusiasm he had at 8 months old. Female cats tend to transition into a calmer, more composed adult demeanor earlier, often by 2 or 3 years of age, settling into a more predictable, lower-energy daily rhythm. This matters practically. If you have young children who want an interactive, high-energy playmate, a male cat's extended playfulness might make him easier to engage safely and consistently. If you are looking for a calmer household companion who is content observing rather than constantly initiating play, a female cat's earlier settling pattern might suit your lifestyle better, particularly in a quieter household or with an owner who values a lower-key daily rhythm. Territorial behavior is where the differences become more concrete and less about vibe and more about actual household management. Unneutered male cats are significantly more prone to urine marking, which is spraying small amounts of strongly scented urine on vertical surfaces to establish territory. This behavior drops dramatically after neutering, particularly if the neutering happens before 6 months of age. But some male cats retain a degree of marking behavior even after the procedure, especially in multi-cat households where territorial competition exists. Female cats can spray too. It is not exclusively a male behavior, but the frequency is measurably lower, and spayed females rarely spray outside of specific stress-related circumstances. If you live in an apartment, if you have delicate furniture, or if you are bringing a cat into a household with existing cats where territorial tension is already a factor, this is not a minor detail. It is a genuinely practical consideration that should influence your decision, particularly if you are choosing between an intact male and any other option, though we strongly recommend spaying and neutering regardless of which sex you choose, for health reasons we will get into later in this video. Social dynamics in multi-cat households deserve their own discussion, because the differences here are significant and frequently misunderstood by new adopters. Male cats, once neutered, tend to establish social hierarchies with other cats more peacefully and with less prolonged conflict. Two neutered males introduced properly to each other will often settle into a stable coexistence relatively quickly, sometimes even forming genuine companionship bonds where they groom each other and sleep together. Female cats tend to be more particular about who they accept into their social circle. Two female cats introduced to each other are statistically more likely to maintain a distant, tolerant coexistence rather than an actively affectionate one, and conflict between two females in the same household, when it occurs, tends to be more sustained and harder to resolve than conflict between two males. This does not mean you should avoid adopting multiple female cats or that female cats cannot bond closely with each other, because plenty of them do. It means that if you are building a multi-cat household and you want to maximize the odds of easy, low-conflict integration, a mixed-sex or all-male combination statistically presents fewer social complications than an all-female combination, particularly when the cats are unrelated and being introduced as adults rather than raised together from kittenhood. Vocalization patterns show a real difference too, though this one is more nuanced. Female cats, especially certain vocal breeds, tend to be more consistently talkative across their lives, using meowing as an ongoing communication tool for a wide range of needs and requests. Male cats tend to be quieter in daily life, but can become significantly more vocal during specific triggering events, particularly if unneutered and detecting a female in heat nearby, where the yowling can become intense and persistent. Once neutered, male vocalization tends to settle into a lower baseline than female vocalization typically shows. If you are sensitive to noise, or if you live in an apartment with shared walls, this is worth knowing in advance. A consistently chatty female cat who meows for attention throughout the day is a different daily experience than a generally quiet male cat, and neither is wrong, but one of them will suit a noise-sensitive household better than the other. Now let's address the health differences, because this is where the decision moves from personality preference into something with genuine medical weight, and where I want you to pay close attention regardless of which sex you are considering, because the information here could save your cat's life. Male cats carry a significantly elevated risk of urinary blockage, medically known as feline urethral obstruction. The male urethra is longer and narrower than the female urethra, and this anatomical difference means that when crystals, mucus plugs, or small stones form in the urinary tract, a male cat's urethra is far more likely to become completely obstructed than a female cat's wider, shorter urethra. A complete urethral obstruction is a medical emergency. If a male cat cannot urinate for more than 24 to 48 hours, toxins build up in the bloodstream to lethal levels, and without emergency veterinary intervention, the outcome is fatal. This is not a rare or exotic condition. It is one of the most common emergency presentations in male cats, and every owner of a male cat needs to know the warning signs. Frequent trips to the litter box with little or no output, straining or crying while attempting to urinate, and licking excessively at the genital area are all signs that require same-day veterinary attention, not a wait-and-see approach. Female cats face a different set of sex-specific health considerations. Unspayed female cats carry meaningfully elevated risk for two serious conditions: pyometra, a life-threatening uterine infection that typically develops in middle-aged and older unspayed females and requires emergency surgery, and mammary tumors, where the risk of malignancy increases substantially with each heat cycle a female cat goes through before being spayed. A female cat spayed before her first heat cycle carries a dramatically lower lifetime risk of mammary cancer than a female cat spayed after several heat cycles have occurred. This is one of the strongest arguments in veterinary medicine for early spaying, because the protective effect essentially disappears the longer you wait. Both of these risk profiles, the male urinary blockage risk and the female pyometra and mammary tumor risk, are dramatically reduced through timely spaying and neutering. This is not a minor recommendation tucked into a footnote. Spaying and neutering, done at the age your veterinarian recommends for your specific cat, is one of the single most impactful health decisions you will make for your cat, regardless of which sex you choose. And it is worth repeating that intact cats of either sex face meaningfully higher lifetime health risks than their neutered or spayed counterparts. There is also a size and physical difference worth mentioning briefly. Male cats are, on average, physically larger than female cats of the same breed, sometimes by 20 to 30% in body weight. This is not a dramatic factor in most adoption decisions, but if you have small children in the home, a physically larger, typically more tolerant male cat can sometimes handle boisterous handling with more physical resilience than a smaller female cat might, though this is a generalization that depends heavily on individual temperament rather than sex alone. So how do you actually use all of this information to make a decision? Here is the honest answer. If you are adopting a single cat into a quiet, adult-only household, and you want a consistently affectionate, easygoing companion who bonds broadly rather than intensely with one person, the statistical tendencies favor a neutered male. If you want a cat who forms a deep, specific bond with you personally, who offers affection in a more selective and deliberate way, and you do not mind a cat who is a bit more independent day to day, the statistical tendencies favor a spayed female. If you are building a multi-cat household, mixing sexes or leaning male-heavy statistically reduces the likelihood of prolonged territorial conflict. And regardless of which sex you choose, understanding the specific health risks tied to that sex, urinary blockage in males and pyometra, and mammary tumors in unspayed females means you will be the kind of owner who recognizes an emergency before it becomes a tragedy. The most important thing I can tell you, though, is this. These are tendencies, not guarantees. The individual cat sitting in front of you with their own specific history, socialization, and personality will always tell you more about who they actually are than their sex chromosome does. Use this information to understand what you are statistically more likely to experience. But let the actual cat, the one making eye contact with you through the shelter enclosure, have the final say. Let's move on to the second decision, and this one comes up constantly in the comments from people who are considering adoption but are worried about whether a particular cat will actually be happy in their specific household, one-person cats versus family cats. Is this a real distinction, or is it something people made up to explain a cat's mood on a given day? The answer is that it is very real. It is well documented in feline behavioral research, and understanding it before you adopt can prevent months of frustration, and more importantly, prevent a cat from living in a state of chronic stress in a home that does not match their social needs. Let's start with what a one-person cat actually looks like in practice, because the term gets used loosely, and it is worth being precise. A one-person cat is a cat who forms a primary attachment bond to a single individual in the household and treats every other person, even people who live in the same home and provide daily care, as a secondary presence. This is not the cat being rude or playing favorites out of spite. It reflects how the cat's early socialization window developed, and it often reflects genuine individual temperament that leans towards selective rather than broad social bonding. A true one-person cat will often greet their chosen person enthusiastically at the door, sleep exclusively in that person's room, follow that person from room to room throughout the day, and seek out that person specifically when they are stressed, unwell, or want comfort. Meanwhile, that same cat might barely acknowledge a spouse, a roommate, or children in the household, tolerating their presence without seeking their company, and sometimes actively avoiding being picked up or handled by anyone other than their chosen person. This pattern tends to develop for a few specific reasons. Cats who were socialized primarily by one person during the critical socialization window between 2 and 7 weeks of age, particularly if that early exposure to humans was limited to a single caregiver, often carry that narrow social template into adulthood. Cats who experienced early stress, instability, or multiple rehoming situations sometimes develop a one-person attachment as a security mechanism, essentially deciding that trusting one consistent, reliable person is safer than distributing trust broadly. And some of this is simply innate temperament, the same way some people are naturally more selective in their friendships regardless of their upbringing. Now let's talk about the family cat pattern. because this is a genuinely different behavioral profile, not simply a more socialized version of the same cat. A family cat distributes affection, attention-seeking, and comfort-seeking behavior relatively evenly across every member of the household. This cat will greet whoever walks through the door first. This cat will rotate which family member's lap they choose to sleep on. This cat is generally comfortable being picked up, handled, and interacted with by children, guests, and every adult in the home without a strong preference emerging. Family cats tend to develop this pattern when they experience consistent, positive handling from multiple people during their early socialization window, when they come from a breeder or foster situation where multiple caregivers were involved in daily care from a young age, and when their individual temperament leans toward broad sociability rather than narrow selectivity, a trait that does appear to have some genetic and breed-associated components alongside the environmental ones. Here is why this distinction matters so much when you are deciding which kind of cat to bring into your specific household. If you live alone, or if you are the clear primary caregiver in a household where other family members have limited daily involvement with the cat, a one-person cat can form an extraordinarily deep, rewarding bond with you specifically. Many owners describe their one-person cat as the most attached, most emotionally present pet they have ever had, precisely because that emotional investment is concentrated entirely on one relationship rather than distributed. But if you live in a busy household with multiple family members, especially children, who all want to interact with and bond with the cat, a one-person cat can create a genuinely difficult dynamic. Children who are excited to have a new pet and who reach out for affection can experience real disappointment and confusion when the cat consistently avoids them in favor of one parent. This is not a training issue you can fix with patience alone. It is a fundamental attachment pattern that, while it can soften somewhat over time with consistent, gentle, positive interaction from the less preferred family members, rarely reverses completely. This is where knowing what to look for during the adoption process becomes genuinely useful rather than just interesting trivia. When you are meeting a cat you are considering adopting, particularly in a shelter environment, pay attention to how the cat responds when multiple people in your group interact with them, not just how they respond to the one person who happens to be holding them or speaking to them first. A cat who shifts attention relatively evenly between different people in your group, who does not fixate on one individual and ignore the others, is showing early signs of the broader social template that tends to translate into a family cat pattern in a new home. A cat who becomes visibly more engaged, more relaxed, and more interactive with one specific person, while remaining guarded or indifferent toward everyone else in your group, is showing you a preview of the one-person attachment pattern before you have even brought them home. Age matters here too. Kittens under 4 months of age have not fully developed their social attachment patterns yet, and a kitten who seems evenly interested in everyone in your family at 8 weeks old can still develop a strong one-person preference by the time they reach maturity, particularly if one family member ends up doing the overwhelming majority of feeding, playing, and daily care. If you specifically want a family cat and you have multiple people in the household, the single most effective thing you can do is deliberately rotate caregiving responsibilities during the kitten's first several months. Take turns feeding. Take turns being the one who initiates play sessions. Take turns being the person who responds when the kitten seeks attention. This deliberate rotation during the socialization. Sensitive early months meaningfully increases the odds that the cat develops broad rather than narrow attachment patterns. Adult cats present a different situation because by the time a cat reaches social and emotional maturity, typically around 2 to 4 years of age, their attachment template is largely, though not completely, established. If you are adopting an adult cat from a shelter or rescue, ask detailed questions about the cat's behavior in their previous home or foster placement. A foster family who reports that the cat bonded intensely with one specific person in their household while remaining distant from everyone else is giving you a meaningful preview of what to expect, and that preview is worth taking seriously rather than assuming your household will simply be different. It is also worth addressing directly what happens when you already have a one-person cat and your household composition changes, because this is a genuinely common situation. New partners moving in, roommates changing, children growing older and wanting more direct interaction. All of these can create friction with an established one-person cat. The good news is that while you should not expect a complete transformation, gradual, patient, low-pressure positive association building, letting the previously ignored family member be the one who provides a specific favorite treat or engages in a specific favorite play activity consistently over weeks and months can meaningfully soften the exclusivity of the bond, even if it never becomes fully even. There is one more layer to this comparison worth addressing, which is the difference between a cat being selectively bonded and a cat being generally fearful or poorly socialized. A one-person cat who adores their chosen person and simply prefers not to engage deeply with others is a cat with a specific, healthy attachment style. A cat who hides from everyone in the household, including their supposed favorite person, and who shows fear responses like flattened ears, dilated pupils, and defensive body language toward every family member, is not exhibiting a one-person preference. That cat is exhibiting generalized fear or anxiety, which is a different situation entirely, and one that benefits from patience, environmental enrichment, and in some cases professional behavioral consultation, rather than simply being labeled as a personality type. So which one is right for your household? If you are a single adult living alone or the clear primary caregiver in your home with limited daily involvement from others, either pattern can work well for you, though a one-person cat may ultimately offer the more intensely rewarding bond specifically with you. If you have a busy, multi-person household, particularly one with children who are excited to interact directly with a new pet, actively look for early signs of broad sociability during the adoption process, and if you are raising a kitten, deliberately rotate caregiving responsibilities from the very beginning to encourage that broader attachment pattern to develop. And if you already have a one-person cat in a multi-person household, understand that the exclusivity you are seeing is not personal. It is not fixable through frustration or forced interaction, and it responds best to patient, low-pressure, consistent, positive association over time. Number 3, cat wheels versus puzzle feeder circuits. This is one of those decisions where two products get marketed with almost identical promises. More enrichment, more mental stimulation, less boredom, and yet they solve completely different problems for completely different cats. If you have been scrolling through cat accessories online, you have almost certainly seen both of these, and you have probably wondered which one is actually worth the investment for your specific cat. Let's start with the cat wheel, because it looks the most dramatic and it generates the most attention online, and for good reason. A cat wheel is essentially a large curved running wheel, similar in concept to a hamster wheel but scaled up dramatically for a cat's size and weight. The cat walks or runs along the inside curve of the wheel, and the wheel rotates beneath them, allowing for sustained, continuous physical movement in a relatively small footprint compared to what an equivalent amount of open floor running would require. The appeal here is almost entirely physical rather than cognitive. A cat wheel is designed to burn energy, and it does this extremely well for the specific subset of cats who take to it. High-energy breeds, particularly Bengals, Abyssinians, and Savannahs, along with high-energy individual cats of any breed, often adopt wheel running as a genuinely enjoyable daily activity once they are properly introduced to it. Some cats will use a wheel for 10 or 15 minutes at a stretch, burning off the kind of pent-up physical energy that would otherwise translate into 3 a.m. zoomies through your house or destructive scratching born out of restlessness. But here is the honest complication with cat wheels that a lot of marketing conveniently leaves out. The training process to get a cat comfortable using a wheel is significantly longer and more inconsistent than most people expect. Cats are not naturally inclined to walk on a moving surface, and unlike hamsters, who instinctively understand wheel running almost immediately, cats often need weeks of gradual desensitization, starting with the wheel stationary and treat-associated, moving to slow manual rotation, and only eventually progressing to independent use. And even after that patient process, a meaningful percentage of cats simply never adopt the behavior. They may investigate the wheel a few times out of curiosity and then ignore it permanently. This is not a training failure on your part. Some cats are simply not wired for this kind of activity, regardless of how much time you invest in introducing it properly. There is also a cost and space consideration that matters practically. Cat wheels are large. Even compact models take up a meaningful footprint in a room, and the higher quality models with sturdy construction and quiet rotation mechanisms are a genuinely significant investment, often costing several $100s. If you have a small apartment, or if aesthetics and space matter to you, this is a real factor, not a minor inconvenience. Now let's look at the puzzle feeder circuit, which takes an entirely different approach to enrichment. A puzzle feeder circuit involves multiple food puzzle stations placed around your home, each requiring the cat to perform a specific manipulation, batting a lever, rolling a treat ball, sliding a panel, or working through a maze-like structure in order to access a portion of their daily food or treats. Instead of one large piece of exercise equipment, you are distributing smaller cognitive challenges throughout the cat's environment and throughout their day. The appeal here is primarily cognitive rather than physical, though there is a secondary physical benefit because cats do move between stations and engage in more prolonged, active foraging behavior compared to simply walking up to a bowl. Puzzle feeding taps directly into a behavior that is deeply innate to cats, regardless of breed or individual energy level, which is foraging and working for food. In the wild, cats do not receive their calories in a single convenient bowl. They hunt, they problem solve, they expend effort, and they receive their reward in small, scattered increments throughout the day. A puzzle feeder circuit recreates this pattern far more accurately than a wheel does, and because foraging is such a fundamental, hardwired behavior, the vast majority of cats engage with puzzle feeders successfully, unlike the more inconsistent adoption rate we see with wheels. There is also a meaningful health benefit that goes beyond enrichment alone. Cats who eat their entire daily portion from a single bowl in one sitting, particularly dry food, tend to eat faster and in larger single quantities, which is associated with both weight gain and, in some cats, vomiting shortly after eating due to overly rapid consumption. Distributing. The same daily food amount across multiple puzzle stations naturally slows down eating, increases the number of small feeding sessions throughout the day, and for cats who need to lose weight, effectively turns mealtime into a low-intensity exercise session. Since the cat has to move between stations and manipulate each puzzle rather than simply consuming everything at one static bowl, the training curve for puzzle feeders is also considerably gentler and more universally successful than the training curve for wheels. Most cats, even nervous or lower energy individuals who would never engage with a wheel, figure out basic puzzle feeders within a few days when you start with the easiest difficulty setting and gradually increase complexity. This is not a coincidence. It reflects the fact that food-motivated problem-solving is a survival-relevant behavior across essentially the entire feline species. While wheel running is not an ancestral behavior, cats evolved to perform it all, which is exactly why some cats take to it and others simply never do. So which one should you actually invest in? Here is how to think about it honestly. If you have a specifically high-energy cat, particularly a young adult of a naturally athletic breed who is displaying clear signs of pent-up physical energy, destructive nighttime activity, excessive vocalization out of restlessness, or general restlessness that toys and play sessions alone are not resolving, a cat wheel can provide a genuinely valuable physical outlet, provided you are willing to invest the patient, gradual training process required, and you have realistic expectations that some cats simply will not take to it despite your best efforts. If your cat is lower energy, if you are managing weight concerns, if your cat tends to eat quickly and inhale food, or if you simply want a highly reliable, near universally successful enrichment option that works for almost any cat regardless of energy level or age, a puzzle feeder circuit is the more dependable investment. It is also, generally, significantly less expensive to set up, since multiple basic puzzle feeders cost a fraction of what a single quality cat wheel costs. And you can build the circuit gradually, starting with 1 or 2 stations and expanding over time based on what your specific cat engages with most. And here is the option that a lot of owners do not consider, but that often produces the best outcome of all. These two approaches are not mutually exclusive, and for cats who genuinely need both physical exertion and cognitive engagement, using both, a modest puzzle feeder setup for daily meals alongside a wheel for cats who take to it, addresses both categories of need rather than forcing a choice between them. The mistake to avoid is assuming that either product alone solves every enrichment need your cat has. A wheel burns energy, but does not engage foraging instinct. A puzzle feeder engages foraging instinct, but does not provide the same sustained cardiovascular output that a genuinely high-energy cat may need. Understanding which category of need your specific cat is showing you, restlessness and excess physical energy, or understimulation and lack of mental challenge, tells you which one to prioritize first, and for many households that answer becomes clear within just a few weeks of paying closer attention to your cat's actual behavior rather than guessing based on what looks impressive online. Number 4. Boarding facility versus in-home pet sitter. If you have ever had to travel and leave your cat behind, you already know the particular anxiety this decision creates, because you are essentially trying to predict how a creature who cannot tell you how they feel will handle several days of disrupted routine. And getting it wrong does not just mean an unhappy cat. It can mean a genuinely stressed cat who stops eating, develops stress cystitis, or comes home to you noticeably changed. Let's start with boarding facilities, because they solve one problem extremely well and create a different problem that owners frequently underestimate. A boarding facility, whether it is a dedicated cat boarding business or the cat section of a veterinary clinic, provides professional, round-the-clock supervision. There is always someone present. If your cat has a medical emergency, if she stops eating, if something goes visibly wrong, there is staff on site to notice and respond immediately, which is a genuine safety advantage over any situation where your cat is checked on only once or twice a day. Boarding facilities also tend to be less expensive per day than hiring a dedicated in-home sitter, particularly for longer trips, since you are paying for a shared staffing model rather than someone's individual time and travel. But here is the trade-off that matters enormously for cats, specifically, in a way it simply does not for dogs. Cats are deeply territorial animals whose sense of security is tied intimately to their environment, their scent markers, and the predictability of their space. A boarding facility, no matter how clean, well-run, and staffed with genuinely caring people, is still an unfamiliar environment filled with unfamiliar smells, unfamiliar sounds, and in many cases, the sounds and smells of other stressed animals nearby, including barking dogs in adjacent sections of a shared facility. For a naturally anxious cat, or frankly for most cats given how strongly territory-linked their stress response is, this environmental disruption alone can produce a meaningfully elevated stress state for the entire duration of the stay, regardless of how attentive the staff are. This is not a minor consideration. Feline stress manifests physically in ways that create real health risk. Stressed cats are significantly more prone to developing feline idiopathic cystitis, a painful, stress-triggered bladder inflammation that can escalate into a dangerous urinary blockage, particularly in male cats, exactly the emergency we discussed earlier in this video. Stressed cats also frequently stop eating or eat significantly less than usual, and a cat who does not eat for more than 24 to 48 hours risks a serious liver condition called hepatic lipidosis. A well-run boarding facility staff will monitor for these signs, but the underlying environmental stressor causing them, unfamiliar territory, is inherent to the boarding model itself and cannot be fully eliminated no matter how good the facility is. Now let's look at the in-home pet sitting model, where a sitter comes to your home, typically once or twice daily, to feed, provide fresh water, clean the litter box, and spend some dedicated time with your cat, while your cat remains in their own familiar territory for the entire duration of your absence. The single biggest advantage here is exactly the thing boarding cannot offer: environmental continuity. Your cat remains surrounded by their own scent, their own furniture, their own established hiding spots and vantage points, and their daily routine within the home stays largely intact. For the majority of cats, this dramatically reduces the overall stress of your absence compared to being relocated to an unfamiliar facility. Many cats who are given a choice between disruption of routine, you leaving, and disruption of environment, being relocated, handle the first far better than the second, provided their basic care needs are being met reliably. The trade-off with in-home sitting is supervision frequency and consistency. Unlike a boarding facility with staff present continuously, an in-home sitter is typically only present for a relatively short visit once or twice a day. If your cat has a sudden medical emergency between visits, there is a real gap in supervision compared to a boarding facility, and this matters more for certain cats than others. A young, healthy cat with no chronic conditions carries relatively low risk from this reduced supervision window. A senior cat, a cat with diabetes requiring insulin timing, a cat with a history of urinary blockage, or any cat with an active medical condition carries meaningfully higher risk from infrequent supervision. And for these specific cats, the safety advantage of a boarding facility with continuous staffing may genuinely outweigh the stress reduction advantage of staying home. There is also significant variability in sitter quality that does not exist in the same way with an established boarding facility. Anyone can advertise as a pet sitter, and the range of reliability, cat-specific knowledge, and genuine attentiveness varies enormously between individuals. This means the in-home sitting option is only as good as the specific person you choose, and doing real diligence here matters. Ask for references specifically related to cat care, not just general pet sitting. Ask what they would do if your cat displayed early signs of not eating or straining in the i.e. litter box. Ask how they would handle a genuine emergency, including whether they have a plan for immediate veterinary transport if something goes wrong outside of normal visit hours. A sitter who has clear, confident answers to these questions is a meaningfully safer choice than one who has never considered them. So how do you actually decide between these two options for your specific cat? If your cat is young, healthy, and has no chronic medical conditions requiring close monitoring, and particularly if your cat shows any signs of being anxious or reactive to unfamiliar environments, hiding for extended periods when guests visit or when routine is disrupted, the stress reduction benefit of staying in familiar territory with a reliable in-home sitter is likely to produce the better overall outcome, provided you have thoroughly vetted the sitter you are hiring. If your cat is a senior, has a chronic condition requiring monitoring or medication on a strict schedule, has a documented history of urinary issues, or has any condition where hours matter in an emergency, the continuous supervision of a quality boarding facility, ideally one associated with or located at a veterinary clinic, may provide a genuinely important safety margin that outweighs the additional environmental stress, particularly for trips longer than a few days. And for shorter trips, a genuinely well-vetted in-home sitter who visits twice daily rather than once morning and evening closes much of the supervision gap while still preserving the environmental familiarity that matters so much to a cat's baseline stress level. The right answer is not universal. It depends on your specific cat's health status, their individual temperament around unfamiliar environments, and the length of the trip you are planning, and taking a few minutes to honestly assess where your own cat falls on each of these factors will tell you more than any general recommendation ever could. Let's talk about harness walking versus catio-only outdoor access, because this is a comparison that comes up constantly from owners who want to give their indoor cat some form of safe outdoor experience, but are not sure which approach actually delivers on that promise without creating new risks. Harness walking means exactly what it sounds like. You put a properly fitted cat harness on your cat, attach a leash, and take them outside for supervised walks, much like you would with a dog, though the experience looks and feels very different in practice. Catio access means building or installing an enclosed outdoor structure, ranging from a simple window-mounted box to an elaborate multi-level enclosed patio. that connects to your home and allows your cat to move freely in and out of a secured outdoor space without a leash, without supervision required at every moment, and without the cat ever being in a position where they could run off or encounter an off-leash dog. Let's start with harness walking, because it gets promoted heavily online with videos of confident cats strolling through parks, and that image creates expectations that do not match most cats' actual experience. The truth is that cats are fundamentally different from dogs in how they respond to leash walking. Dogs are evolutionarily wired to walk alongside a pack leader and generally adapt to leash structure relatively quickly. Cats are not wired this way at all. Their instinct in an unfamiliar outdoor environment while restrained is often to freeze, to try to bolt, or to drop low to the ground and refuse to move. None of which is a training failure on your part. It is simply a mismatch between what leash walking asks of an animal and what a cat's nervous system is built to do. This does not mean harness walking is impossible or that no cat can learn to enjoy it. Some cats, particularly those introduced to a harness very young and given a slow, patient, weeks-long desensitization process starting indoors before ever stepping foot outside, do learn to genuinely enjoy supervised walks. But this is a meaningfully smaller percentage of cats than the confident internet videos suggest, and forcing an unwilling cat into harness walks, particularly an adult cat with no prior exposure, more often produces a stressed, frightened animal than a happy one. And pushing forward despite clear stress signals, flattened body posture, dilated pupils, attempts to bolt, does real harm to your cat's trust in you and their overall stress baseline. There is also a safety dimension to harness walking that deserves honest attention. Even with a properly fitted harness, cats can and do slip out of harnesses that are not sized and secured correctly, since their flexible spine and lack of a true collarbone allows them to contort their body in ways a dog cannot. An escaped cat in an unfamiliar outdoor environment, potentially near roads, off-leash dogs, or other hazards, is a genuinely dangerous situation. And this risk exists every single time you take your cat outside on a harness, no matter how experienced you both become with the practice. Now let's look at catio access, which solves the core safety problem in a fundamentally different way. Instead of bringing your cat into an open, unpredictable outdoor environment under restraint, you are bringing a secured piece of the outdoor environment to your cat. A catio, whether it is a modest window box or a full enclosed patio space, gives your cat direct sensory access to fresh air, sunlight, grass, birds, and insects, all of the environmental stimulation that indoor cats often crave, without the fundamental risk of escape, without the stress of unfamiliar open terrain, and without requiring your active supervision for the entire duration your cat spends outside. This matters enormously for the cat's actual experience, not just for your convenience. A cat in a catio can move at their own pace, retreat indoors the instant something startles them, choose their own vantage point, and generally exercise the kind of autonomous environmental control that aligns with how cats are naturally wired to interact with territory, rather than being led through unfamiliar space on a restraint. Most cats, including cats who show no interest whatsoever in harness walking, take to catio access almost immediately and use it enthusiastically, because it does not ask them to override any of their natural instincts to benefit from it. The trade-off with catio access is primarily practical rather than behavioral. Building or installing a catio requires a genuine investment, whether that is a simple, do-it-yourself window box costing relatively little, or a full architectural addition to your home costing several $1,000s for an elaborate, enclosed patio. It also requires that you actually have the physical space and home ownership flexibility to install one, which is simply not an option for every renter or every housing situation. A harness, by contrast, costs very little and requires no permanent modification to your living space, which makes it accessible in situations where a catio is simply not feasible, regardless of which option would otherwise be preferable for your specific cat. There is also a distinction worth making around exercise value, because the two options are not actually solving the same problem, despite both being labeled outdoor enrichment. A catio provides sensory enrichment and environmental stimulation, but relatively limited actual exercise, since most cats in a catio settle into observing rather than running around extensively. A successful harness walk for the cats who genuinely take to it provides both sensory stimulation and meaningful physical activity through sustained walking, which a stationary catio cannot replicate to the same degree. So which one should you pursue for your specific cat? If you own your home and have any reasonable outdoor space available, even a small balcony or a section of yard, a catio is very likely to be the higher success, lower risk investment, delivering reliable outdoor enrichment to the overwhelming majority of cats regardless of their individual temperament around restraint and unfamiliar open space. If you rent, or if a catio is genuinely not feasible in your living situation, harness walking remains a worthwhile option to attempt. But go in with realistic expectations. Start the desensitization process slowly and entirely on your cat's terms indoors before ever attempting an outdoor walk. And pay close attention to whether your specific cat is one of the ones who genuinely comes to enjoy it, or one of the ones who is simply tolerating stress because you have decided this is something you are doing together. And if you have the resources and space to do both, a catio for daily low-effort outdoor access alongside occasional harness walks for cats who have shown genuine enthusiasm for it gives you the fullest picture of what safe outdoor enrichment can look like for an indoor cat without asking your cat to accept more restraint-based stress than their individual temperament is actually built to handle. Diwam. Let's talk about foster to adopt versus direct adoption, because a lot of people assume these are basically the same thing with different paperwork, and that assumption can lead you to skip a step that genuinely matters for both you and the cat. Direct adoption is the process most people are familiar with. You meet a cat, whether at a shelter, a rescue, or through an adoption event, you go through the application and approval process, and within a relatively short window, often the same day or within a few days, that cat comes home with you permanently. The relationship between you and the cat and the commitment on both sides is established immediately and completely. Foster to adopt works differently. You bring the cat home under a trial arrangement, typically lasting anywhere from a week to a month depending on the organization's policy, during which you are caring for the cat as if they were yours. But the legal adoption is not finalized until the trial period ends, and both you and the organization confirm the placement is working. If it is not working, for any reason, the cat returns to the rescue or shelter without the same finality or paperwork complications that would come from an adoption being reversed. Here is why this distinction actually matters, and it has almost nothing to do with legal technicalities and everything to do with information you simply cannot get any other way. A shelter environment, no matter how well run, is an inherently artificial, high-stress setting for a cat. Fluorescent lighting, unfamiliar cats in close proximity, the sounds of a busy facility, all of this means that a cat's behavior in a shelter meeting room tells you remarkably little about how that same cat will behave in the quiet, familiar environment of an actual home. Cats who appear withdrawn, even fearful, in a shelter setting frequently reveal themselves to be playful, affectionate, and confident once they are in a stable home environment with time to decompress. And the reverse happens too. A cat who seems calm and easygoing during a brief shelter visit can reveal, once they have settled into a real home over several days, behaviors that were completely invisible during that short meeting, whether that is anxiety around specific triggers, litter box preferences that do not match your setup, or reactions to other pets or children that only emerge once genuine comfort and territory investment develop. Foster to adopt gives you the actual data you need before the decision becomes permanent. You get to observe how the cat behaves with your children over real extended interaction rather than a 15-minute shelter visit. You get to see whether the cat's temperament actually matches what was represented to you. You get to find out whether existing pets in your home genuinely integrate with this specific cat rather than guessing based on a brief supervised meeting. And critically, you get to discover any underlying medical issues that only become apparent with sustained observation, changes in appetite, energy level, or litter box habits that would not show up in a single shelter visit, but that emerge clearly over a week or two of actual daily life together. This matters enormously for reducing the rate of returned adoptions, which is a genuinely serious welfare issue in the sheltering world. A cat who is adopted directly and then returned after several weeks because the fit was not right experiences real, measurable psychological harm from that instability on top of whatever stress they were already carrying from their prior history. Every return resets the cat's trust-building process and adds to a pattern of instability that becomes progressively harder on the animal with each occurrence. Foster to Adopt is specifically designed to catch mismatches during a period explicitly framed as trial and adjustment, before the emotional and psychological stakes of a final placement are in play, which meaningfully reduces the likelihood of a full return happening later. There's also a benefit that runs in the opposite direction, one that people do not talk about as often. Foster to Adopt gives the cat themselves a genuine, low-pressure opportunity to reveal who they actually are without the weight of a permanent decision hanging over every interaction. Some cats, particularly those with any history of past trauma, instability, or extended shelter stays, carry a kind of guardedness that only fully resolves once they trust that their environment is stable and not about to change again. A foster arrangement, ironically, can sometimes produce a more genuine, settled version of a cat's personality than a final adoption might, precisely because there is less immediate pressure being placed on the relationship to work perfectly from day one. Now, direct adoption is not without its own advantages, and it is worth being fair to that side of the comparison. Direct adoption provides immediate certainty and commitment, which some owners genuinely prefer over an extended trial period that can feel emotionally ambiguous, particularly if you have already fallen in love with a specific cat and the idea of a trial feels unnecessarily tentative for a bond you already feel confident about. Direct adoption also tends to move faster administratively, which matters if you are trying to provide a home to a cat facing time constraints at an overcrowded shelter, where speed of placement can occasionally be a genuine welfare consideration in its own right. Direct adoption also works well, and arguably works just as well as Foster to Adopt, in situations where you already have substantial, reliable information about the specific cat. If you are adopting a cat you have fostered previously through an unrelated foster program, or a cat whose full behavioral history has been thoroughly documented by a rescue that specializes in behavioral assessment, much of the uncertainty that Foster to Adopt is designed to resolve has already been addressed through other means, and an extended trial period may add limited additional value in that specific circumstance. So how should you actually decide which path to take? If you are adopting from a shelter environment where your primary information about the cat comes from a brief, high-stress meeting rather than extended observation, and particularly if you have other pets or children in the home whose compatibility with this specific cat is a genuine unknown, Foster to Adopt is very likely worth pursuing, even if it requires a bit more patience before the relationship feels legally finalized. The information you gain during that trial period is not a bureaucratic formality. It is genuinely protective, both for your household stability and for the cat's long-term welfare. If you already have strong, reliable behavioral information about the specific cat you are considering, whether through prior fostering, detailed rescue documentation, or an unusually thorough meet and greet process, direct adoption is a perfectly sound choice, and there is no meaningful reason to introduce an artificial waiting period simply because it is available as an option. The underlying principle here is the same one that shows up throughout responsible cat ownership. Information reduces risk, both the risk of a mismatched placement and the risk of harm to the cat from an unstable transition, and whichever path gives you more genuine information about the actual cat in front of you, rather than the cat you are hoping they will turn out to be, is generally the path worth taking. Entwickelt. Let's talk about calming pheromone diffusers versus calming supplements, because if you have a cat who struggles with anxiety, whether that shows up as hiding, excessive vocalization, litter box avoidance, or over-grooming, you have probably encountered both of these products marketed as the solution to feline stress. They sit next to each other on the same shelf at the pet store. They use almost identical language on their packaging. Calm your cat naturally, and it is easy to assume they are basically interchangeable. Two versions of the same idea. They are not. They work through completely different mechanisms. They address different categories of anxiety, and understanding that difference actually matters before you spend money on either one. Because using the wrong tool for your cat's specific type of stress means you end up disappointed in a product that might have worked beautifully for a different problem. Let's start with pheromone diffusers, because the science behind them is specific and worth explaining properly rather than just taking on faith. Cats produce a facial pheromone from glands located around their cheeks and chin, and they deposit this pheromone constantly throughout the day by rubbing their face against furniture corners, door frames, and the people they trust. This behavior is not random affection, although it certainly reads that way to us. It is a territorial marking behavior, and the specific pheromone involved functions as a chemical signal that essentially communicates this space is safe and familiar to the cat's own nervous system every time they encounter it again. A pheromone diffuser works by synthesizing an analog of that exact pheromone and releasing it continuously into the air of a room through a small plug-in unit, similar in size and design to an air freshener. The theory, and this is genuinely well supported by veterinary behavioral research rather than being purely a marketing claim, is that continuously exposing your cat to this synthetic version of their own safety signal helps recreate an ambient sense of territorial security, essentially telling your cat's nervous system that this space is marked and known and safe, even during periods of disruption when the cat's own natural pheromone deposits have been diluted or overwhelmed by new smells, new objects, or new inhabitants. This mechanism explains exactly why pheromone diffusers excel at one particular category of anxiety and underperform at others. The real strength of a diffuser is addressing environmental and territorial stress specifically. If your cat's anxiety is triggered by changes to their physical space, a recent move to a new home, new furniture that changes the layout of a familiar room, ongoing construction noise that disrupts the usual acoustic environment, or the introduction of another animal whose scent has not yet been fully absorbed into the household's collective smell profile, a pheromone diffuser plugged into the room where your cat spends the most time can meaningfully reduce that specific category of stress. This is not an instant effect. Veterinary behavioral studies consistently show the benefit building gradually over 1 to 2 weeks of continuous, uninterrupted use, which means the diffuser needs to be running before you expect to see results, not started reactively the day a stressful event has already begun. The limitation is baked directly into the mechanism itself. Pheromone diffusers are fundamentally passive and environmental, which means they do nothing meaningful for anxiety that is not primarily territorial in origin. A cat whose anxiety is triggered by separation from a specific person, by travel, by an unfamiliar car ride, or by an inherently traumatic isolated event, like an unavoidable vet visit, will not experience much relief from a diffuser, because the diffuser is not addressing the source of that particular stress at all. It is telling the cat's nervous system that the room is safe, which is simply not the variable causing distress in those situations. Diffusers also require sustained use in a fixed location to work, which means they are a poor fit for anxiety that shows up unpredictably across multiple rooms or that follows the cat rather than staying tied to one physical space. Now let's look at calming supplements, which take an entirely different approach by working through the cat's internal physiology rather than through their external environment. These products typically come as chews, powders sprinkled over food, or liquid additives, and they usually contain one or more specific active ingredients that have accumulated genuine research support for reducing anxiety in cats. L-theanine, an amino acid found naturally in tea leaves, is one of the most studied, and it appears to support calming neurotransmitter activity in the brain without causing sedation or drowsiness, which matters because you generally do not want a cat who is simply too tired to display anxious behavior. You want a cat whose underlying stress response is genuinely reduced. Alpha-casozepine, derived from a specific milk protein, is another ingredient with a growing body of veterinary research behind it, showing measurable reductions in stress-related behaviors, including hiding, inappropriate elimination, and excessive vocalization across several controlled studies. Supplements have a genuine advantage that diffusers structurally cannot offer, which is portability and situational responsiveness. A supplement given roughly an hour or two before a known stressful event, a scheduled vet visit, a long car trip, the arrival of house guests, can help blunt the intensity of that specific triggering event in a way a stationary diffuser simply cannot, since the diffuser's effect is tied entirely to the room it is plugged into and does nothing once your cat leaves that space in a carrier. Supplements also tend to address a broader range of underlying anxiety triggers than diffusers do, precisely because they are working on the cat's internal stress response system, rather than on one specific territorial chemical signal, which means they can offer at least partial benefit across situational, separation-related, and travel-related anxiety, in addition to general environmental stress. The trade-off with supplements is that the evidence base, while genuinely promising for the specific ingredients mentioned, is considerably less consistent across individual cats than the pheromone research is. Some cats respond noticeably and reliably to a particular calming supplement, showing calmer body language, reduced hiding, and improved appetite around stressful events within days of starting. Other cats show minimal or no observable effect from the exact same product at the exact same dose. This is a real and well-documented pattern in veterinary behavioral medicine, and it reflects genuine individual variation in how different cats metabolize and respond to these compounds. Not a flaw in the product or a failure on your part if the first supplement you try does not produce dramatic results. Unlike the pheromone mechanism, which works through a signal essentially universal to the species, the internal physiological response to ingested calming ingredients varies enough between individual cats that you should expect some trial and observation before finding what actually works for yours. There is also a safety and caution dimension here that deserves clear, direct attention rather than a passing mention. Pheromone diffusers are essentially risk-free from a physiological standpoint because they work externally through scent and are never ingested by the cat, which makes them a genuinely low-risk option to try for almost any cat regardless of age, health status, or existing medication. Calming supplements are a meaningfully different category of product precisely because they are ingested and act directly on the body's internal chemistry, which means they deserve real caution rather than casual experimentation. If your cat is on any existing medication, particularly anything affecting the nervous system, thyroid, or kidneys, talk to your veterinarian before adding a calming supplement, since interaction effects are genuinely possible even with ingredients generally considered gentle. If your cat has any underlying liver or kidney condition, this caution matters even more, because supplements, like every other substance your cat ingests, are processed through those organs, and a cat with compromised organ function may not clear these compounds the way a healthy cat does. None of this means calming supplements are dangerous for the average healthy cat. It means that treating them as a casual, consequence-free purchase, the way you might treat a new toy, is the wrong frame, and a quick conversation with your veterinarian before starting one, especially for a cat with any existing health complexity, is a genuinely reasonable step rather than an overly cautious one. It is also worth being honest about a pattern that shows up often enough in veterinary behavioral consultations to mention directly. Anxiety that presents as a behavioral problem, inappropriate elimination outside the litter box, excessive vocalization, or over-grooming to the point of bald patches is sometimes actually a symptom of an underlying medical condition rather than a purely behavioral issue that a diffuser or supplement alone will resolve. Painful conditions, urinary tract issues, and certain endocrine disorders can all produce behavior that looks exactly like anxiety on the surface. This is not a reason to avoid trying a diffuser or supplement as a first step for mild, clearly situational stress, but it is a reason to involve your veterinarian if the anxious behavior is severe, persistent beyond a few weeks, or accompanied by any physical symptom like changes in appetite, weight, or grooming pattern. Because in those cases, you are dealing with a situation that calls for a genuine medical evaluation rather than a product purchased off a shelf, however well-intentioned that purchase is. So how do you actually decide which one to reach for first, if your cat's anxiety appears clearly tied to environmental or territorial triggers, a recent move, a new pet in the household, ongoing renovation noise, furniture rearrangement, a pheromone diffuser installed in the room? Your cat spends the most time in is the evidence-backed first step, and given how minimal the risk profile is, there is very little reason not to try it as your starting point for this specific category of stress. If your cat's anxiety is more clearly event-specific, tied to particular triggering situations like veterinary visits, travel, or the arrival of unfamiliar people, a calming supplement used specifically around those events, introduced first under low-stakes conditions well before you actually need it to work so you can observe your individual cat's response without anything important riding on the outcome, is the more targeted tool for that category. And for cats whose anxiety is more generalized, showing up persistently across multiple contexts rather than tied to one clear trigger. Using both together is common practice and entirely reasonable. A diffuser running continuously as a baseline environmental support, alongside a supplement used situationally around specific known stressful events, since the two are addressing genuinely different parts of the anxiety picture rather than duplicating the same effect on top of each other. What is worth carrying forward from this comparison, regardless of which option or combination you choose, is that neither of these products replaces identifying and addressing an underlying cause when one can be found, and neither one is a substitute for veterinary guidance if your cat's anxiety is severe, persistent, or showing up alongside any physical symptom, because at that point, a shelf product is simply not the right tool for what your cat is actually dealing with. Let's get into number 8, Smart Self-Cleaning Litter Box versus Traditional Litter Box. This is one of those purchases where the marketing promises sound almost too good to be true. An automated system that scoops itself, eliminates the daily chore, and reduces odor without you lifting a finger. And the question a lot of you are asking is whether that promise actually holds up once the box is sitting in your home, and your specific cat is the one deciding whether to use it. Let's start with the traditional litter box, because before we talk about what the smart version improves on, it is worth being clear about what the traditional box already does well. A traditional box is simple, mechanically reliable, and completely predictable from your cat's point of view. There are no moving parts, no motors, no sensors, nothing that can malfunction, jam, or behave unexpectedly while your cat is standing inside it. This matters more than it sounds like it should, because cats are creatures who rely heavily on predictability in their environment, and the litter box is one of the most vulnerable moments in a cat's day, a moment where they are physically exposed and instinctively wired to want a calm, uneventful experience. A traditional box delivers that with total consistency, every single time, for the entire life of the product. The trade-off, obviously, is that a traditional box requires manual scooping, typically once or twice daily for optimal cleanliness. And this is not just a matter of convenience. Cats are remarkably sensitive to the cleanliness of their litter box, and a box that goes uncleaned for even a single extra day can trigger a cat to start eliminating elsewhere in the house. Not out of spite, but because the box has crossed their individual threshold for what they are willing to use. For multi-cat households, this manual maintenance burden multiplies, since the general guideline is 1 litter box per cat plus 1 additional box, which means a 3-cat household should ideally be maintaining 4 separate boxes, scooped daily, a genuinely significant time commitment that a lot of owners struggle to keep up with consistently. Now let's look at the Smart Self-Cleaning Litter Box, which is designed specifically to solve that maintenance burden. These units use sensors to detect when a cat has finished using the box, then automatically rake, sift, or rotate the waste into a separate sealed compartment, usually within a few minutes of the cat leaving, which means the box returns to a clean state almost immediately after every single use, rather than sitting soiled until you get around to scooping it yourself. For a busy household or for anyone managing multiple cats, this can genuinely transform the cleanliness baseline of the litter area, keeping it in a near constantly fresh state that would be difficult to match through manual scooping alone, no matter how diligent you are. There is a real health benefit tied to this too, not just a convenience benefit. Because these units maintain a consistently cleaner surface, cats who might otherwise start avoiding a manually maintained box that has gone a day without scooping are less likely to develop litter box aversion in the first place. And litter box aversion, once established, can be genuinely difficult to reverse and often leads to inappropriate elimination habits that persist even after the underlying cleanliness issue has been fixed. Preventing that aversion from developing in the first place through consistently clean conditions is a meaningful advantage that goes beyond simple convenience for you. But here is where the honest complications come in. And this is exactly the information that gets left out of a lot of the glowing product reviews you see online. The automated raking or rotating mechanism in these units produces motor noise and physical movement, and a percentage of cats, particularly nervous or easily startled individuals, find this genuinely frightening, especially the first several times they experience it. Some cats adapt within days and never think twice about it again. Others develop a lasting aversion to the box specifically because they associate it with an unpredictable mechanical event they cannot control, and this aversion can be difficult to undo once it sets in, sometimes requiring you to abandon the smart unit entirely and start over with a traditional box to rebuild trust in the litter area. There is also a genuine cost consideration that goes beyond the upfront purchase price, which is already significantly higher than a traditional box, often several $100s compared to a simple traditional box costing a small fraction of that. These units require ongoing consumable costs, specialized waste receptacle liners or cartridges in many models, and they require regular deep cleaning of the internal mechanism itself, since litter dust and residue accumulate in the moving parts over time and can cause malfunctions or sensor errors if left unmaintained. This is not a set-it-and-forget-it purchase in the way the marketing sometimes implies. It shifts your maintenance burden from daily scooping to periodic deeper cleaning and occasional troubleshooting, rather than eliminating maintenance altogether. Sensor reliability is another practical issue worth mentioning honestly. These units rely on weight sensors or motion detection to determine when a cat has entered and exited the box. And in multi-cat households, or with particularly light or particularly large cats, sensor misreads are a documented recurring issue, sometimes triggering the cleaning cycle while a cat is still inside the box, which is exactly the kind of startling, unpredictable event that can create lasting behavioral aversion. Manufacturers have improved this considerably over successive product generations, but it remains a real risk factor that traditional boxes simply do not carry, since there is no mechanism to misfire in the first place. There is also a consideration specific to kittens and senior cats that is worth addressing directly. Very young kittens are often too light to reliably trigger the weight sensors in many smart litter box models, meaning the automated cleaning cycle may not activate properly for a kitten's use, and most manufacturers explicitly recommend against using these units until a kitten reaches a certain minimum weight, typically listed clearly in the product documentation. Senior cats with mobility issues, arthritis, or vision decline may also struggle with the higher entry walls that many smart litter box designs feature, since these units often need a taller housing to accommodate the internal mechanism, and a senior cat who is already hesitant about jumping or stepping over a raised threshold may avoid the box altogether, regardless of how clean it stays, which defeats the entire purpose of the investment. So how do you actually decide which one is right for your household? If you are managing multiple cats and are genuinely struggling to keep up with the scooping frequency multiple boxes require, and you're Cats are confident, non-anxious individuals without a documented history of being easily startled by mechanical noise. A smart self-cleaning box can meaningfully improve the overall cleanliness of your litter area and reduce the daily burden on you in a way that is worth the higher upfront and ongoing cost. If you have a nervous or easily startled cat, a kitten below the minimum weight threshold, or a senior cat with mobility concerns, a traditional box remains the safer, more reliable choice, and introducing a smart unit to a cat with any of these characteristics carries a real risk of creating a litter box aversion that is considerably harder to fix than the maintenance burden you were trying to solve in the first place. There is also a multi-cat identification feature that has become increasingly common in higher-end smart litter box models, worth mentioning because it changes the calculation for households with more than one cat. Some units can track which specific cat is using the box based on weight signatures, logging frequency and duration of use for each individual cat, and sending alerts to an app on your phone if a specific cat's usage pattern changes suddenly, fewer visits than usual, unusually long visits, or a sudden spike in frequency. This is not a gimmick. Changes in litter box frequency are often the earliest observable warning sign of developing health problems, including urinary tract issues and diabetes, and a system that flags this kind of change automatically, before you would necessarily notice it yourself through casual observation, can genuinely lead to earlier veterinary intervention. For a multi-cat household where it is naturally harder to track each individual cat's habits by simple observation alone, this feature adds real value beyond the basic convenience of automated scooping. Though it is worth noting, this tracking capability is not universal across all smart litter box models and tends to appear primarily in the more expensive tier of the product category. Odor control is another area where the comparison is more nuanced than it first appears. Smart litter boxes generally do outperform traditional boxes on ambient odor, specifically because waste is sealed into an enclosed compartment immediately after each use, rather than sitting exposed in open litter until the next scooping session. This is a genuine, noticeable difference, particularly in smaller living spaces or homes without a dedicated, well-ventilated area for the litter box. However, the sealed waste compartment itself still needs to be emptied on a regular schedule, typically every few days depending on how many cats are using the unit, and neglecting that emptying schedule produces its own concentrated odor problem when the compartment is eventually opened, sometimes worse than what a traditional box would have produced if scooped on time. The odor advantage is real, but it depends on you maintaining the compartment, emptying schedule just as consistently as you would have maintained manual scooping, which means the convenience gain is more about spacing out the required maintenance tasks than eliminating maintenance responsibility altogether. Warranty and long-term reliability are worth factoring into the cost comparison too, since this is where the higher upfront price of a smart unit either proves itself worthwhile or becomes a source of ongoing frustration. Motorized components with moving parts inherently carry more points of potential mechanical failure than a static plastic box ever could. And while established manufacturers in this space have generally improved reliability significantly over successive product generations, it remains reasonable to expect an eventual repair need or replacement part purchase over the unit's lifespan in a way that simply is not a consideration with a traditional box. Reading current owner reviews for the specific model you are considering, rather than relying solely on the manufacturer's own marketing claims, is a genuinely useful step before committing to the higher price point, since reliability track records vary meaningfully between different brands and even between different generations of the same product line. And if you do decide to try a smart unit, do not simply swap it in and remove the traditional box on day one. Introduce it alongside the existing traditional box for at least a week or two. Let your cat investigate it at their own pace with the automated cycle either disabled or manually triggered only while you are present to observe the reaction, and only fully transition away from the traditional box once you have clear evidence that your specific cat is comfortable with it. This gradual cat-led introduction is the single biggest factor in whether a smart litter box becomes a genuine improvement to your household or an expensive object gathering dust in a corner, while your cat continues using a box you have already removed. Kilen sedek res, pontosan lemerve, tizen ketezer negi sazharmin sniol karakter, ezerkilen sazharmin segi sho, sel tartomaniban. Telies shaveg. Number 9. Cat cafe and multi-household visits versus single household life. This is a comparison that will feel unfamiliar to a lot of cat owners at first, because most of us think about a cat's social world as simply the humans and animals inside our own four walls. But there is a growing pattern. Cats who regularly visit other households, whether through a shared custody arrangement between separated family members, a cat cafe environment where the cat lives permanently but interacts with a rotating stream of visitors, or a foster or boarding situation that repeats regularly. And understanding how this affects a cat's well-being compared to a stable single household life is worth taking seriously, rather than assuming more social exposure is automatically better. Let's start with what single household life actually provides for a cat, because it is easy to undervalue simply because it is the default most of us assume without examining it. A single stable household gives a cat one consistent territory, one consistent scent profile, one consistent set of routines, and a predictable, limited set of people and animals they need to build trust with. This consistency is not a limitation. It is precisely the environment that allows a cat's stress response system to settle into its lowest baseline state, because there is nothing new to constantly assess, evaluate, and adjust to. The territorial security we have talked about throughout this series, the reason pheromone diffusers work, the reason cats prefer familiar spaces, all of it depends on this kind of stability existing in the first place. Cats in a single stable household also have the opportunity to develop a genuinely deep, individualized bond with their specific people over time, since the same faces, voices, and interaction patterns repeat daily across years. This is where the deepest attachment behaviors we see in cats, the kind of specific recognition and preference that builds up over a long shared history, actually develop. It requires time, repetition, and consistency, none of which a rotating cast of visitors or households can replicate in the same way. Now let's look at the cat cafe model specifically, since it is the most structurally different arrangement worth examining here. In a cat cafe, cats live permanently on site, but the environment includes a constant rotating stream of visitors who come specifically to interact with them, sometimes dozens of different people in a single day. This is a genuinely unusual environment from a feline perspective, and how well a cat adapts to it varies enormously based on individual temperament rather than any universal rule. Cats who thrive in this environment tend to share a specific cluster of traits: high sociability, low startle response to unfamiliar people, and a general comfort with unpredictability in their social environment, even while their physical territory remains constant. These cats often genuinely enjoy the variety of attention and interaction, and well-run cat cafes typically screen for exactly this temperament profile when selecting which cats to place in the space, precisely because forcing a naturally shy or anxious cat into that environment produces a genuinely difficult welfare situation rather than a positive one. The cats who struggle in a cat cafe environment, and this happens even in well-run establishments with good intentions, are typically cats with a more reserved or anxious baseline temperament, cats who need to build trust slowly with a small number of known individuals rather than being expected to tolerate a constant rotation of strangers reaching out to touch them. For these cats, the cat cafe model, regardless of how well-meaning the staff and visitors are, produces a chronic low-grade stress state that can manifest as excessive hiding, reduced appetite, or increased susceptibility to stress-related illness like the urinary issues we have discussed elsewhere in this series. This is exactly why responsible cat cafe operators conduct genuine temperament assessments before placing a cat in the visitor-facing space, and why some cats who do not fit that profile are kept in staff-only areas or transferred to standard foster and adoption pathways instead. Shared custody arrangements, where a cat splits time between two separate households, typically following a relationship separation, present a different version of this same underlying tension. On one hand, this arrangement allows the cat to maintain a bond with two people who each genuinely care about them, which has real emotional value if the cat had formed attachments to both individuals before the separation occurred. On the other hand, it requires the cat to repeatedly adjust to two different territories, two different scent profiles, and potentially different routines, feeding schedules, and litter box setups, none of which aligns well with what we know about how strongly cats rely on environmental consistency for their baseline stress level. The evidence here suggests that shared custody arrangements work best and are least disruptive to the cat's well-being when the transition schedule is genuinely infrequent. Think monthly rather than weekly, when both households maintain as much consistency as possible in feeding schedule, litter type, and general routine, and when the cat's individual temperament leans toward adaptability rather than the more territorially rigid end of the spectrum. A cat who already shows signs of stress with minor environmental changes, hiding when furniture is rearranged, stress-related litter box avoidance during a recent move, is a poor candidate for a repeated back-and-forth arrangement, regardless of how much both people involved care about maintaining a relationship with the cat. There is a practical health consideration that deserves direct mention here, because it is easy to overlook amid the emotional complexity of these arrangements. Every transition between households or into an unfamiliar social environment carries the same stress-related health risks we have discussed throughout this series: elevated risk of stress cystitis, appetite suppression, and if severe or prolonged enough, the kind of chronic stress state that measurably impacts immune function over time. This does not mean these arrangements are inherently harmful. It means the frequency and consistency of the transitions matter enormously, and a cat moving between two genuinely familiar, consistent environments on an infrequent schedule faces a very different risk profile than a cat facing constant, unpredictable exposure to new people and spaces. So how do you actually think about this if you are facing one of these situations rather than a simple, single household arrangement? If you are considering whether your specific cat would be a good fit for a cat cafe-style environment, whether you are involved in running one or considering surrendering a cat to one, honestly assess your cat's baseline temperament around unfamiliar people first. A cat who already greets guests confidently, who does not hide for extended periods when visitors are in the home, and who seeks out attention from unfamiliar people rather than avoiding them, is a much better candidate for that kind of environment than a cat who currently disappears the moment someone unfamiliar walks through your door. If you are navigating a shared custody arrangement following a separation, prioritize infrequent transitions over frequent ones wherever the human relationships involved can accommodate that. Work to keep the actual daily care routine, food brand, feeding times, litter type, as consistent as possible across both households, and watch closely for the specific stress signals we have covered throughout this series: changes in litter box habits, appetite changes, increased hiding, since these are your earliest warning signs that the arrangement is creating more strain on your cat than either household realizes. It is also worth noting that many cat cafes operate in partnership with local shelters and rescues, specifically as an adoption pathway, where the cafe environment doubles as an extended, low-pressure meet and greet space for potential adopters, rather than existing purely as a permanent living situation for the cats involved. In this model, the constant visitor, exposure serves a genuine functional purpose, increasing the odds of a good adoption match by letting potential adopters observe a cat's natural behavior over repeated visits rather than a single brief shelter meeting. Even in this context, though, the same temperament screening applies. A cat who is visibly stressed by the cafe environment is not well served by remaining in that setting simply because it theoretically increases adoption exposure, and responsible operators will move such a cat into a quieter fostering arrangement rather than keeping them in a visitor-facing role that is actively working against their well-being. There is a useful, low-stakes way to test whether your own cat might tolerate this kind of environment before committing to anything permanent. whether that is fostering through a cafe-style program or considering a shared custody arrangement. Invite a small number of unfamiliar people into your home over several separate occasions, ideally 1 or 2 visitors at a time rather than a crowd, and observe your cat's actual behavior rather than assuming based on how they act with people they already know well. Does your cat approach the visitor within the first 20 minutes, or do they remain hidden for the entire visit and only re-emerge once the person has left? Does your cat's body language stay loose and relaxed, or do you see the classic stress signals we have covered throughout this series? Flattened ears, dilated pupils, low tail carriage. This kind of low-stakes observation, repeated a few times with different visitors, gives you a genuinely reliable preview of how your specific cat is likely to handle a higher exposure social environment, far more reliable than guessing based on their general reputation as a friendly or shy cat. If you do decide to move forward with either arrangement, build in an honest checkpoint after the first few weeks, rather than assuming the initial adjustment period is simply temporary discomfort that will resolve on its own. Track appetite, litter box habits, and general activity level during this window, the same markers we have emphasized throughout every comparison in this series. And if you are seeing a consistent negative trend rather than a gradual improvement, that is meaningful information telling you this particular cat is not a good fit for this particular arrangement, regardless of how much you had hoped it would work. There is one more distinction worth making before we move on, and it is the difference between a cat adapting to occasional novelty and a cat being asked to live in a state of permanent unpredictability. Even cats with confident, sociable temperaments still benefit from having some fixed point of stability somewhere in their life. A specific room, a specific person, a specific piece of furniture that remains constant regardless of what else is changing around them. The most successful cat cafe and shared custody arrangements we see are the ones where this fixed point is deliberately preserved. A private, staff-only retreat space in a cafe setting, or a consistent favorite blanket and feeding routine that travels between households in a custody arrangement, rather than arrangements where literally everything in the cat's environment is in constant flux with no anchor point at all. And if your cat's current life is a simple, stable, single household with no additional social complexity, understand that this default is not a limitation compared to more socially elaborate arrangements. For the significant majority of cats whose temperament leans toward territorial consistency and gradual, deep trust building with a small number of known individuals, a stable single household is not the less enriching option. It is the environment that best matches what the species actually needs to thrive, and the growing trend toward more socially complex arrangements for cats says more about human lifestyle changes than it does about what is objectively best for feline well-being in most individual cases. Number 10. Seasonal coat changes, and specifically the choice between a shedding management brush and a dedicated de-shedding tool. Because if you have ever vacuumed your home twice in one day during spring and still found tumbleweeds of cat hair drifting across your floor by evening, you already know this is not a minor cosmetic issue. It is a genuine seasonal management challenge, and the tool you reach for actually matters more than most owners assume. Let's start by understanding what is actually happening physiologically during a seasonal coat change, because this context explains why the right tool choice depends so heavily on timing, rather than simply picking one product and using it year-round. Cats, particularly those with any degree of outdoor exposure or those living in homes with natural light exposure that mimics seasonal daylight changes, shed their undercoat in response to changing day length, growing a denser undercoat as days shorten, heading into colder months and then releasing that undercoat in a concentrated shedding period as days lengthen again, heading into warmer months. This is not identical to the low-level, year-round shedding every cat experiences as part of normal coat maintenance. Seasonal shedding is a distinct higher volume event, and it is specifically this seasonal undercoat release that most owners are trying to manage when they reach for a grooming tool during these transition periods. Let's talk about the shedding management brush first, since this is the tool most owners already own and reach for by default, often because it is what came recommended for general grooming rather than something purchased specifically for seasonal shedding. A standard shedding brush, whether it is a slicker brush with fine bent wire bristles or a bristle brush designed for surface coat maintenance, works primarily on the top coat and the loose hair sitting at the very surface of the coat. It is genuinely effective at what it is designed for: removing loose surface hair, distributing natural skin oils through the coat for shine and coat health, and providing a generally pleasant, low-intensity grooming experience that most cats tolerate well and many genuinely enjoy. The limitation becomes clear specifically during a heavy seasonal shed, because a standard brush is not designed to penetrate down into the dense undercoat where the bulk of seasonal shedding hair actually originates. During a normal, low shedding period, this is not a meaningful gap, since there is relatively little undercoat hair being released at any given time, and a standard brush keeps up just fine. But during the concentrated weeks of a seasonal coat blow, as it is often called among groomers, a standard brush essentially skims the surface, while a much larger volume of loose undercoat hair remains trapped beneath, ready to work its way out gradually onto your furniture, your clothing, and your floors over the following weeks rather than being efficiently removed in a single grooming session. Now let's look at a dedicated de-shedding tool which is specifically engineered to address exactly this gap. These tools typically feature a row of closely spaced metal teeth or a specialized edge designed to reach through the top coat and grip the loose undercoat hair specifically, pulling it free while leaving the healthy, still attached top coat largely undisturbed. The difference in efficiency during a seasonal shed is genuinely dramatic. Where a standard brush might remove a modest handful of loose hair in a 5-minute session, a proper de-shedding tool used correctly on the same cat during the same shedding period can remove several times that amount, because it is actually reaching the source of the volume rather than skimming what has already worked its way to the surface. This efficiency comes with real trade-offs that are worth understanding before you assume more aggressive is automatically better. De-shedding tools apply more direct pressure and mechanical action against the skin and coat than a standard brush does, and used incorrectly, either with too much pressure or too frequently, they can cause skin irritation, coat damage, or genuine discomfort that makes a cat increasingly resistant to future grooming sessions. This is a real risk, not a theoretical one, and it is the primary reason some owners who tried a de-shedding tool once without proper technique ended up with a cat who now actively flees at the sight of any grooming tool. The correct approach involves using genuinely light pressure, letting the tool's teeth do the work of catching loose hair rather than pressing down firmly against the skin, working in the direction of hair growth rather than against it, and limiting sessions to a reasonable duration, generally 5 to 10 minutes at a time, rather than attempting to remove the entire seasonal undercoat in a single marathon session that becomes uncomfortable for your cat well before you have finished. Breaking a heavy seasonal shed into several shorter sessions across a week or two, rather than one exhausting session, produces both a better hair removal outcome and a considerably more positive grooming experience for your cat. There is also a coat type consideration that genuinely changes which tool matters more for your specific cat. Short-haired cats, despite popular assumption, often have surprisingly dense undercoats and can benefit significantly from de-shedding tool use during seasonal transitions, sometimes even more dramatically than certain long-haired breeds, since a dense, tightly packed short undercoat can be particularly prone to trapping loose hair close to the skin. Long-haired cats generally benefit from de-shedding tool use too, but they typically also need more frequent standard brushing between de-shedding sessions to prevent the loose undercoat hair from tangling with the longer top coat and forming the beginning stages of matting, which becomes a much more serious grooming problem requiring professional intervention if it progresses far enough. There is a health dimension to this comparison that goes beyond simply reducing the hair on your furniture. Cats groom themselves constantly, and during a heavy seasonal shed, a cat who is not receiving adequate help managing that loose undercoat ends up ingesting significantly more loose hair through self-grooming than they would during a normal shedding period. This directly increases the risk of hairball formation, And in cats prone to gastrointestinal sensitivity, a heavier than usual hairball burden during seasonal shedding periods can contribute to vomiting, and in less common but more serious cases, intestinal blockages requiring veterinary intervention. Proactive de-shedding during these seasonal windows is not purely a cosmetic convenience for you. It is a genuine preventive health measure that reduces how much loose hair your cat is left to manage entirely on their own through grooming. So how should you actually think about which tool to reach for, and when? During the low-level, year-round shedding that happens outside of seasonal transition periods, a standard shedding brush used a few times a week is genuinely sufficient for the vast majority of cats, and there is no need to introduce the more intensive de-shedding tool during these lower-volume periods. But as you approach and move through the seasonal transition windows, typically spring and again in early autumn, depending on your climate and your cat's individual pattern, transitioning to a dedicated de-shedding tool used in short, gentle sessions several times a week for a period of 2 to 4 weeks addresses the concentrated undercoat release far more effectively than a standard brush alone would, and meaningfully reduces both the hairball risk and the sheer volume of loose hair accumulating throughout your home during that window. There are a few additional factors worth addressing before you settle into a seasonal grooming routine. Senior cats deserve particular attention during seasonal shedding periods because self-grooming naturally declines with age, as arthritis and reduced flexibility make it physically harder for an older cat to reach and thoroughly groom their entire body the way they did as a younger adult. This means a senior cat is often less able to manage their own seasonal undercoat release through self-grooming alone, which shifts more of the responsibility onto you specifically during these transition windows. And a senior cat, who suddenly seems to be matting more than usual, particularly along the back and hindquarters where self-grooming is hardest to reach, is showing you exactly where your de-shedding attention needs to focus. Cats with any diagnosed skin condition, allergies, or a history of dermatitis warrant a more cautious approach to de-shedding tools, specifically since the same mechanical action that efficiently removes loose undercoat hair can also aggravate already sensitive or inflamed skin. If your cat has any known skin sensitivity, it is worth discussing the specific tool and technique with your veterinarian before your first seasonal de-shedding session, since some cats in this category do better with more frequent, very gentle standard brushing sessions rather than the more intensive de-shedding tool approach that works well for cats with healthy, unaffected skin. Diet plays a supporting role. Here too, one that is easy to overlook when you are focused entirely on the grooming tool itself. Cats receiving adequate omega-3 fatty acids, whether through a quality commercial diet formulated with this in mind or through a veterinarian-approved supplement, generally show a healthier coat with better natural shine, and in many cases, a somewhat more manageable shedding pattern compared to cats on a diet lacking these specific fatty acids. This is not a replacement for actual grooming during seasonal transitions, but it is a genuine complementary factor. And if your cat's shedding seems unusually heavy or prolonged compared to what seems reasonable for the season, a conversation with your veterinarian about diet alongside your grooming routine is a reasonable next step, particularly since unusually excessive shedding outside the expected seasonal pattern can occasionally signal an underlying health issue, like a thyroid imbalance or nutritional deficiency, rather than simply being a heavier version of normal seasonal coat change. For multi-cat households managing several cats through the same seasonal transition simultaneously, professional grooming becomes worth considering as a supplementary option rather than something you need to handle entirely on your own with a single de-shedding tool. A professional groomer has access to tools like specialized blow dryers designed to loosen and remove undercoat hair through controlled airflow, which can dramatically accelerate the seasonal shedding process in a single session. Compared to what home brushing alone accomplishes over several weeks, this is not a necessary expense for every household, but for cats with particularly dense coats, for owners managing multiple heavy shedders at once, or simply for anyone who wants a single deep seasonal reset rather than weeks of gradual home management, 1 or 2 professional sessions timed to the start of each seasonal transition can meaningfully reduce both the total shedding duration and the amount of at-home maintenance required afterward. Pay attention to your own cat's individual seasonal pattern too, since it will not necessarily line up perfectly with the calendar, particularly for cats living primarily indoors under artificial lighting, whose shedding cycles can shift somewhat compared to outdoor cats responding directly to natural daylight changes. The clearest signal that you have entered your cat's seasonal shedding window, regardless of what the calendar says, is a noticeable jump in the amount of loose hair you are finding on furniture, clothing, and in your regular brushing sessions compared to what had been normal for your specific cat in recent weeks. That increase is your cue to bring out the de-shedding tool, and once the volume of loose hair being removed, each session begins tapering back down to your cat's normal baseline. That is your signal that the seasonal transition has largely completed and you can return to standard brushing as your primary tool until the next seasonal shift approaches. Number 11. When you move house, should you introduce your cat gradually to the new space, room by room, or simply let them explore the entire home freely from day one? This decision gets treated as an afterthought by a lot of movers who are exhausted from boxes and logistics. But how you handle those first hours and days in a new home has a real measurable impact on how quickly your cat settles and how much stress they carry through the transition. Let's start with the full access approach, because it is what a lot of people do by default, simply because it feels natural. You arrive at the new home, you set your cat's carrier down, you open the door, and you let them wander wherever they want to go while you focus on unpacking. This approach has one clear advantage, which is that it requires no additional effort or planning on your part during an already exhausting day. And some cats, particularly younger, highly confident, low-anxiety individuals, genuinely do fine with this approach, exploring at their own pace and settling in without any obvious signs of distress. But here is why full immediate access creates a genuine problem for the majority of cats, and it comes back to the same territorial security principle we have discussed throughout this series. An entire unfamiliar house, full of unfamiliar smells, unfamiliar sounds, unfamiliar hiding spots, and often still filled with moving boxes and unpacked chaos, is an enormous amount of novel sensory information for a cat to process all at once. Cats are wired to build a sense of security incrementally, mastering a small, defined space thoroughly before expanding their confidence outward. And full immediate access essentially skips this entire process, dropping your cat into total unfamiliarity with no established safe base to retreat to. The result, in a meaningful percentage of cats, particularly more cautious or anxious individual temperaments, is that the cat responds by finding the smallest, most enclosed hiding spot available, often behind or under a large piece of furniture or deep in a closet, and remaining there for an extended period, sometimes days, refusing to eat normally, refusing to use a litter box that feels dangerously exposed in unfamiliar territory, and generally existing in a heightened stress state because they have no established safe zone to return to. This is not a rare, exceptional reaction. It is a common, well-documented response pattern, and it can meaningfully delay the entire settling in process compared to a more structured introduction. Now let's look at the gradual, room-by-room introduction approach, which works by deliberately recreating the incremental territory mastery process cats are naturally wired to go through rather than skipping it. The process starts by setting up one single room, ideally a quieter room away from the main flow of moving activity, with your cat's essential resources already in place before you ever bring them into the house. Litter box, food, and water. A familiar bed or blanket carrying their own scent, and a few familiar toys. Your cat spends their first hours or even the first full day or two in this one contained space, with the door closed to the rest of the house. This single-room confinement accomplishes something genuinely important that full access does not. It gives your cat a completely masterable territory almost immediately. a space small enough that they can fully explore, scent mark, and establish as secure within a relatively short period, rather than facing an overwhelming, unmasterable expanse all at once. Once your cat is showing clear signs of comfort in that single room, eating normally, using the litter box without hesitation, exploring confidently rather than staying pressed into one corner, moving around and even displaying playful behavior, you gradually expand access, opening the door to one additional adjoining room while keeping the original base room's litter box and resources in place as a fallback retreat. This expansion continues incrementally, room by room over the following days, always allowing your cat to retreat back to their established secure base whenever the newly opened space feels like too much at once. Critically, you are following your cat's actual behavior as the signal for when to expand access rather than following a fixed calendar schedule. Some confident cats move through this entire process within 2 or 3 days. More anxious or cautious individual cats may need a week or more before they are ready to have the whole house opened up to them. And pushing the schedule faster than your specific cat's behavior indicates they are ready for defeats the entire purpose of the gradual approach. There is a practical logistics benefit to this approach that goes beyond your cat's emotional well-being too. One that is easy to overlook amid the stress of moving day itself. Confining your cat to one secured room during the move keeps them safely out of the way of the actual physical chaos of moving. Exterior doors propped open for furniture movers, unfamiliar people coming and going, boxes being carried through hallways, all of which represent genuine escape risk for a stressed cat in an unfamiliar environment with doors open to the outside. A cat who bolts out an open door during a move into an unfamiliar neighborhood they have no territorial knowledge of whatsoever faces a genuinely dangerous situation, and this single practical safety consideration alone is often enough reason to choose the contained, gradual approach regardless of how confident your specific cat's temperament might otherwise be. There is also a scent management dimension to the gradual approach worth understanding, because it explains part of why the incremental process works as well as it does. As your cat spends time in each newly opened room, they are naturally depositing their own facial pheromones through the rubbing and marking behaviors we discussed earlier in this series, gradually converting each new space from unfamiliar territory into recognized, self-marked territory. This is a genuinely different process than simply being physically present in a space, and it is part of why rushing a cat through unfamiliar rooms too quickly without giving them time to actually engage in this territorial, marking behavior produces a less secure outcome than the same physical square footage explored at a pace the cat controls themselves. For multi-cat households, the gradual approach becomes even more valuable, since it also gives you the opportunity to monitor how your cats are adjusting to the new space both individually and in relation to each other, since established social dynamics between cats can sometimes shift, at least temporarily, when the underlying territory itself has changed completely. Introducing rooms gradually, potentially even keeping cats temporarily separated in different base rooms during the earliest transition period if there is any sign of increased tension between them, gives you room to manage this adjustment carefully rather than having multiple stressed cats navigating an entirely unfamiliar, unstructured space simultaneously. So which approach should you actually use for your own move? If you have a young, previously confident, low-anxiety cat with no history of stress reactions to environmental change, a full access approach, while not our top recommendation, is unlikely to cause serious harm. Though even in this case, a brief single-day confinement period during the height of actual moving chaos, furniture arriving, doors propped open, unfamiliar movers in the space, remains a wise safety precaution regardless of your cat's general temperament. For the majority of cats, and particularly for any cat with a history of stress responses to smaller environmental changes, an established one-person attachment pattern that already suggests a more security-oriented temperament, or simply an unknown temperament in a newly adopted cat you have not yet lived with through any prior transition, the gradual room-by-room approach is the meaningfully safer and less stressful path. It requires more patience and more deliberate management on your part during an already demanding period, but it directly addresses the specific territorial security needs that drive so much of feline stress response. And it consistently produces a faster, calmer, overall settling-in period than the alternative of simply hoping your cat handles total, immediate unfamiliarity well. Number 12. When a new baby is coming into a household that already includes a cat, should you take a proactive, months-in-advance preparation approach, or is it reasonable to simply adjust reactively once the baby actually arrives? This comparison matters more than almost any other in this series when it comes to preventing a specific, tragic, and completely avoidable outcome, which is a family surrendering a beloved cat to a shelter after the baby comes home, something that happens with genuine regularity and that proper preparation can almost always prevent. Let's start with the reactive adjustment approach, because it is what a lot of expecting parents default to. Usually not out of neglect, but simply because pregnancy and new parenthood already consume every available ounce of planning energy, and the cat's adjustment gets pushed to the back of the list behind nursery furniture, hospital bags, and everything else demanding attention. The thinking here is understandable. We will figure it out once the baby is actually here, and we can see how the cat responds in real time. The problem with this approach is that it stacks every single change your cat will need to adjust to into one compressed, chaotic window, precisely the period when you have the least bandwidth available to manage a struggling cat thoughtfully. New sounds appear overnight: a crying infant, unfamiliar equipment, monitors and swings and white noise machines. New smells appear overnight: diaper changes, baby lotions, formula. Your own routine and attention pattern changes dramatically overnight: sleep deprivation, feeding schedules that consume hours of your day, visitors coming and going far more frequently than usual. For a cat whose entire sense of security depends on predictability and routine, as we have discussed throughout this series, having every single one of these changes arrive simultaneously, with no advance exposure to any of them individually, is about as disruptive an experience as a cat's environment can undergo without an actual physical move. Cats responding to this compressed, reactive adjustment commonly show a specific cluster of stress behaviors: increased hiding, avoidance of previously favorite spots that are now near the baby's activity, and in a meaningful number of cases, litter box avoidance driven by the general elevation in household stress and disruption to their normal territorial sense of the home. This is precisely the pattern that leads some new parents, already exhausted and overwhelmed, to conclude the cat and the baby simply cannot coexist safely, when in reality what they are seeing is an entirely predictable stress response to an abrupt, unprepared transition rather than any fundamental incompatibility between cat and child. Now let's look at the proactive preparation approach, which spreads these same changes out over the months before the baby actually arrives, giving your cat gradual exposure to each individual change well in advance rather than facing all of them simultaneously on day one. This starts as early as your second trimester if possible, and the specific steps matter, so let's go through them properly. Sound desensitization is one of the most valuable and most overlooked preparation steps. Playing recordings of a crying infant at low volume during calm, positive moments, alongside treats or play, several times a week in the months before the birth, allows your cat to habituate to this specific sound before it is attached to a genuinely stressful, chaotic, sleep-deprived household reality. Gradually increasing the volume and duration of these sessions over the following weeks means that by the time an actual infant is crying in your home, the sound itself is no longer a completely novel, alarming stimulus, even though the overall situation is still new. Scent introduction works on a similar principle. If you know in advance what specific baby products you plan to use, lotions, wipes, laundry detergent for baby clothes, introducing small amounts of these scents into the home before the birth, perhaps on a blanket or piece of clothing left in a common area, gives your cat advanced familiarity with what will otherwise be an entirely new smell profile, arriving all at once. Physical space changes deserve their own dedicated preparation window, too. If the nursery is being set up in a room your cat has previously had access to, do this well in advance rather than converting the space abruptly right before the birth. And if your cat has been sleeping on furniture that will become off-limits for safety reasons once the baby arrives, a crib or bassinet, begin redirecting that specific behavior months ahead of time using positive reinforcement toward an approved alternative resting spot, rather than trying to enforce a sudden new boundary during an already overwhelming first week home with a newborn. Routine adjustment is perhaps the most important and most commonly neglected preparation step, precisely because it requires you to practice a disruption before you actually need to. If your current routine involves significant morning and evening attention, play sessions, and feeding times that will inevitably shift once a newborn's unpredictable schedule takes over your household, gradually shifting your cat's own routine toward what you anticipate the post-baby schedule looking like. Earlier or later feeding times, shorter but more frequent attention windows rather than long, uninterrupted sessions, means your cat experiences this adjustment as a gradual shift over months, rather than an abrupt withdrawal of attention the moment the baby comes home, which is precisely the kind of sudden change that damages trust and can trigger attention-seeking behavioral problems. There's also a genuinely important safety component to proactive preparation that goes beyond your cat's emotional adjustment. Establishing clear physical boundaries well before the baby arrives, keeping the nursery off-limits through a screen door or baby gate that allows visual and scent access without physical access, is far easier to establish as an unquestioned norm over months of consistent enforcement than it is to suddenly introduce as a new rule during the first exhausting week of actual newborn care, when you have far less patience and consistency available to reinforce a brand new boundary your cat has never previously needed to respect. The evidence here is not subtle. Cats whose households went through genuine proactive preparation across the months before a baby's arrival show measurably fewer stress-related behaviors in the weeks immediately following the birth, compared to cats in households that took the reactive, adjust-as-we-go approach. And this translates directly into fewer of the surrender situations that occur when overwhelmed new parents conclude, often prematurely, that the cat cannot adapt to the new family structure. This does not mean reactive adjustment guarantees failure, and plenty of cats do eventually settle into a new baby's presence, even without extensive advanced preparation. Particularly resilient, low-anxiety individual temperaments who handle change well across every comparison we have discussed in this series. But it means you are relying on your cat's individual resilience to compensate for a genuinely more difficult transition, rather than actively reducing how difficult that transition needs to be in the first place. And given how much is already demanding your attention in those first weeks with a newborn, giving your cat every advantage in advance is simply the more reliable path. There is one specific health precaution worth addressing directly here because it comes up constantly during pregnancy, and it deserves an accurate answer rather than either dismissal or unnecessary panic. Toxoplasmosis, a parasite that can be present in cat feces, poses a genuine risk to a developing fetus if a pregnant woman becomes newly infected during pregnancy, and this is the source of the common advice that pregnant women should avoid litter box duties. The accurate picture, though, is more reassuring than that advice sometimes implies. The actual risk comes specifically from handling contaminated litter and then transferring the parasite to the mouth, not from simply being in the same household as a cat. And most adult cats who have been indoor pets for any length of time have already been exposed to and developed immunity against this parasite long before the pregnancy even began, meaning they are not actively shedding the organism in the first place. The straightforward, low-effort solution is simply having another household member handle litter box duties during the pregnancy, or wearing gloves and washing hands thoroughly if no one else is available to take over that task, which eliminates the practical risk without requiring any separation from the cat or any reduction in the emotional preparation work described above. It is also worth directly addressing a persistent myth that still circulates and occasionally causes genuine, unnecessary anxiety: the idea that cats will deliberately smother or suffocate a sleeping infant by lying on their chest or face to steal their breath. This has no basis in actual feline behavior or physiology. What is true, and what deserves real precaution, is that cats are drawn to warm, enclosed spaces, and an infant's crib can appear to a cat simply as an appealing warm spot to curl up in, which does carry a genuine, if accidental, suffocation risk if a cat settles directly on top of a sleeping infant's face or chest. This is precisely why the physical boundary preparation discussed earlier, keeping the nursery reliably inaccessible through a screen door, baby gate, or simply a consistently closed door, matters as an actual safety measure, addressing the real underlying risk rather than a mythical, intentional one, while still allowing your cat visual and scent access to the space from a safe distance. Once the baby actually arrives, whether or not you did the proactive preparation work in advance, close observation during the first several weeks tells you a great deal about how the adjustment is genuinely progressing. Watch specifically for changes in litter box consistency, appetite, and whether your cat is still seeking out normal, affectionate interaction with you during calm moments, rather than remaining in a constant state of hiding, regardless of the household's activity level at any given time. A cat who hides during the loudest, busiest moments but re-emerges for normal interaction during quieter windows is showing an appropriate, manageable stress response. A cat who has stopped seeking any interaction whatsoever, even during calm periods, or who shows a sustained decline in eating or grooming beyond the first week or two, warrants a conversation with your veterinarian, rather than an assumption that more time alone will resolve it. It is genuinely worth remembering, as both a reassurance and a long-term perspective, that the overwhelming majority of cats do successfully adjust to living alongside a new baby and go on to develop a perfectly ordinary, often eventually quite fond, relationship with the child as they grow. The toddler years bring their own new adjustment period, since a mobile, unpredictable toddler who wants to grab and chase presents a different challenge than a stationary infant did. And this is a good moment to begin teaching a young child, as early as they are capable of understanding it, about gentle handling and respecting a cat's space, since this ongoing education matters just as much for the long-term relationship as the initial newborn transition did. The work does not end once the first few months have passed. It shifts into a different, ongoing form as your child grows. But the foundation built through thoughtful preparation in those first months makes every subsequent stage of that relationship considerably easier to navigate. So if you are expecting and you have any lead time at all before the baby's arrival, use it deliberately for your cat's benefit, not just for nursery preparation. Begin sound and scent desensitization as early as your second trimester. Establish physical boundaries and redirect any furniture habits that will need to change well in advance. Gradually shift your cat's routine toward what you expect the post-baby schedule to look like, rather than waiting to make that adjustment all at once. And understand that every week of advanced preparation you put in translates directly into a calmer, more stable transition for your cat during a period when your own capacity to manage a struggling cat will be at its absolute lowest, which is exactly why doing this work in advance, rather than reactively, matters as much as it does. See awkward. Number 13, working from home versus being away all day. This is a comparison that has become increasingly relevant as remote work has reshaped so many households, and it raises a genuinely interesting question that a lot of owners have never stopped to consider carefully. Is a cat whose owner is home all day actually better off than a cat whose owner leaves for 8 or 9 hours? Or does constant human presence introduce its own set of complications that the traditional away-all-day arrangement simply does not create? Let's start with the away-all-day household, since this has been the default arrangement for the majority of cat owners for generations. And it is worth being fair about what it actually provides, rather than assuming it represents some kind of neglect by default. Cats are, by nature, animals who spend a significant portion of their day sleeping, with adult cats typically sleeping somewhere between 12 and 16 hours daily. A household where the owner is away for a standard workday actually aligns reasonably well with a cat's natural rest cycle, and many cats in this arrangement spend a large portion of the owner's absence sleeping regardless of whether anyone is present to interact with them. The genuine benefit of this arrangement is the concentrated, predictable quality of interaction when the owner returns. A cat in an away-all-day household typically experiences a clear, distinct block of dedicated attention in the morning, before the owner leaves, and a longer, more relaxed block in the evening after they return. And this predictable rhythm can actually support a stable sense of routine, one of the core needs we have discussed throughout this series. The cat learns exactly when to expect engagement, play, and feeding, and that consistency itself provides a form of security. The limitation, and it is a real one for certain cats, is that this arrangement can leave meaningful gaps in enrichment and stimulation during the many waking hours the cat spends alone during the day, particularly for younger, higher energy cats who are not simply sleeping through the entire absence. Without adequate environmental enrichment in place, window perches, puzzle feeders, safe vantage points, some cats in an away-all-day household develop boredom-related behaviors, destructive scratching, excessive vocalization upon the owner's return, or overeating driven by using food as the primary source of stimulation. Available during the day. Now let's look at the increasingly common working-from-home arrangement, where the owner is physically present in the household for the vast majority of the day. The obvious advantage here is nearly constant availability for interaction, supervision, and the ability to notice subtle changes in behavior or health far more quickly than someone who is only home for a few hours each evening. A working-from-home owner is in a genuinely strong position to catch early warning signs. The very first day of reduced appetite, the very first sign of altered litter box habits, precisely the kind of early detection that makes such a meaningful difference in outcomes for time-sensitive conditions like the urinary blockages we discussed earlier in this series. But constant presence is not automatically the same thing as constant engagement, and this is where the comparison becomes more nuanced than it first appears. A cat whose owner is home all day, but consumed by video calls, focused work, and long stretches at a desk is not necessarily receiving more actual quality interaction than a cat whose owner is absent for a defined block and then genuinely present and engaged for a concentrated evening period. In some cases, working-from-home households actually produce less structured, less predictable interaction than the traditional away-all-day arrangement, because attention becomes scattered and reactive throughout the day, a few minutes here, an interruption there, rather than dedicated blocks the cat can anticipate and rely on. There is also a genuinely underappreciated complication with constant owner presence, which is that some cats develop a heightened dependency on that presence specifically because it has become their entire baseline expectation. And this creates real vulnerability if that presence ever changes, a return to office work, travel, or any other disruption to the constant presence pattern the cat has come to expect. Cats who have never experienced meaningful periods of independent time alone can show much more pronounced separation-related stress responses when that pattern is interrupted compared to cats who were raised with an established rhythm of predictable daily absence built into their routine from the start. There is a practical territorial dimension worth mentioning too, particularly relevant for households transitioning from one arrangement to the other. A cat who has spent years having the entire home to themselves during the day, establishing their own undisturbed patrol routine, favorite napping spots at specific hours based on sunlight patterns, and general daytime autonomy, can experience a genuine adjustment period when an owner suddenly begins working from home full-time, occupying spaces the cat previously had exclusively to themselves throughout the day. This is not usually a serious problem, but it is a real adjustment. And owners who notice their previously easygoing cat becoming somewhat more reserved or displaced, seeming after a transition to full-time remote work, are often seeing exactly this kind of territorial recalibration playing out. Age and life stage matter quite a bit in this comparison too, and they shift the calculation in opposite directions depending on which arrangement you are evaluating. Kittens and young, High-energy cats generally benefit considerably from a working-from-home arrangement, since their need for frequent distributed play and supervision during the critical early months of development is genuinely harder to meet adequately through a single morning and evening block alone. And the near-constant availability of a remote working owner allows for the kind of frequent, short training and socialization sessions that shape a well-adjusted adult cat. Senior cats, on the other hand, often do perfectly well in either arrangement, since their activity and social needs tend to be lower overall, though a working-from-home arrangement does offer the meaningful advantage of closer, more frequent observation for age-related health changes that can develop gradually and easily go unnoticed by an owner who is only home for a few hours each day. Multi-cat households add another layer worth considering specifically. A working-from-home owner is in a considerably better position to notice and address emerging tension between cats before it escalates into a genuine conflict, since subtle warning signs, one cat beginning to avoid a particular room, a slight increase in tail flicking during shared spaces, are far easier to catch through frequent observation throughout the day than through the more limited observation window an away-all-day schedule provides. If you are managing a multi-cat household with any known history of tension between specific cats, this observational advantage of working from home is a genuine, practical benefit worth factoring in alongside the other considerations we have covered. There is also a lighter, more universally recognized reality of working from home with cats that is worth acknowledging honestly, since it affects how genuinely restorative the constant presence actually is for both of you. Cats are drawn to warm laptops, quiet focused moments, and the specific stillness of someone sitting at a desk and video call interruptions. A cat walking across the keyboard, settling directly on the paperwork you need, or vocalizing loudly during an important meeting are such a common experience among remote workers that they have become something of a shared cultural joke. This is not a real problem in the way some of the other considerations in this comparison are, but it does mean that working from home with a cat requires a certain amount of practical accommodation, closing an office door during calls that genuinely cannot tolerate interruption, providing an alternative cozy spot near your workspace so your cat has an appealing option other than your keyboard that away-all-day owners simply never need to think about. For households with a genuinely hybrid schedule, some days working from home and others away at an office, consistency in your cat's expectations still matters more than which specific arrangement dominates the week. Establishing a consistent morning routine, regardless of whether you are home or away that day, and a consistent evening routine once you are back, gives your cat a stable anchor point even amid a schedule that varies day to day. And this consistency in the predictable parts of the routine matters more to your cat's overall stress baseline than which specific arrangement happens to apply on any given day. One more practical distinction worth drawing out, since it applies regardless of which arrangement describes your household, is the difference between availability and attentiveness. A cat does not actually need you to be physically present for 8 straight hours to feel secure and well cared for. What matters far more is whether the interaction you do provide, however it is distributed across your day, is genuinely responsive to what your cat is communicating in the moment, rather than the sheer number of hours you happen to occupy the same physical space. An away-all-day owner who returns home and gives their cat 20 minutes of fully present, attentive play is providing something more valuable to that cat's well-being than a working-from-home owner who is technically present for 9 hours but rarely looks up from a screen to actually notice what their cat is doing or asking for. So how should you actually think about optimizing whichever arrangement applies to your household? If you work away from home for a standard day, the priority is ensuring your cat has genuine environmental enrichment available during your absence, rather than assuming sleep alone fills the entire gap. Window access, rotating toys, puzzle feeders we discussed earlier in this series, and then protecting the concentrated attention blocks you do have available, morning and evening, as consistent, undistracted time rather than allowing them to become an afterthought squeezed in around other obligations. If you work from home, the priority shifts toward being intentional about actually scheduled engagement rather than assuming your physical presence alone is providing adequate stimulation. building in specific, dedicated short play sessions between work tasks rather than only interacting reactively when your cat demands attention, and equally importantly, preserving some predictable periods of genuine independence for your cat even while you are present in the home, whether that is a closed office door during focused work blocks or simply establishing that certain hours are not interaction time, since a cat who never experiences any independent downtime, even while their owner is home, misses out on the same autonomy-building benefit that an away-all-day arrangement naturally provides through its structure. Neither arrangement is inherently superior across the board, and the right framing here is not which one is better in the abstract, but which specific gaps your particular arrangement tends to create and whether you are actively addressing them. An away-all-day household needs deliberate enrichment investment to fill the daytime gap. A working-from-home household needs deliberate structure to ensure presence translates into genuine engagement rather than passive proximity, and needs deliberate boundary setting to preserve your cat's capacity for healthy independence, even while you remain nearby throughout the day. Number 14. A rescue cat with an unknown history versus a kitten raised from birth in your own home. This comparison touches something a lot of prospective adopters worry about privately, but rarely voice directly: the fear that a cat who came from an unknown, possibly difficult past carries some kind of permanent damage that a kitten raised entirely within your own care simply would not have, and whether that fear should actually influence which path you choose. Let's start with the kitten raised from birth, since this represents the clearest, most controlled version of a cat's early development. When you raise a kitten from a young age, ideally from a breeder or foster situation where you have visibility into their first weeks of life, you have direct influence and knowledge over the critical socialization window, generally understood to fall between 2 and 7 weeks of age, during which a kitten's exposure to humans, handling other animals, and novel experiences shapes their baseline temperament for the rest of their life. A kitten who receives gentle, positive handling from multiple people, exposure to normal household sounds, and confident, well-socialized parent cats during this window generally develops into a secure, adaptable adult with a lower baseline anxiety level than a kitten who missed this critical developmental exposure. The advantage here is genuine predictability. You know exactly what this cat's early experiences included. You can shape those experiences deliberately to produce the kind of adult temperament you are hoping for, and you avoid entirely the uncertainty of not knowing what happened to a cat before they came into your life. For families who want the highest degree of control over a cat's developmental trajectory, or who have specific concerns, young children requiring a particularly well-socialized, confident cat, an existing pet requiring careful introduction to a new companion with a known temperament, raising a kitten from a young age offers a level of predictability that a rescue with unknown history simply cannot match. The trade-off is that raising a kitten well requires genuine time and consistent effort during those early months, deliberate exposure to varied handling, sounds, and experiences, active socialization work, if you want the kind of broadly sociable adult temperament we discussed earlier in this series, and the general higher energy demands of kitten care itself. More frequent feeding, more supervision needs, more redirected destructive energy, compared to the generally calmer demands of an adult cat. Now let's look at the rescue cat with an unknown history, which understandably generates more hesitation among prospective adopters precisely because of the uncertainty involved. Here is what is genuinely important to understand, though, and it should meaningfully change how you think about this option. The fear that an unknown history automatically means a damaged, difficult, or permanently anxious cat is not well supported by what we actually see in rescue populations. Cats are remarkably capable of forming new, secure attachments in adulthood, even cats who experience genuine hardship, neglect, or instability earlier in life, provided the new environment offers consistent, patient, positive care over a meaningful adjustment period. This is not to say that history never matters. Cats who experience significant trauma, particularly trauma involving human handling specifically, sometimes carry a longer-lasting wariness around certain triggers, rapid movements, raised voices, than a cat with a stable early history would show. But the framing that an unknown history is a liability compared to the guaranteed blank slate of a kitten misunderstands both how adaptable adult cat temperament genuinely is and how much of a kitten's future temperament remains genuinely unknown at the point of adoption, regardless of how carefully you plan their early socialization. Here's an advantage the rescue cat with unknown history actually offers that a kitten cannot, and it is worth taking seriously rather than dismissing as a consolation prize. An adult rescue cat's temperament is already established and observable at the point you meet them, not a projection of how careful socialization might shape a still developing kitten. What you see in a well-run foster placement, genuine behavioral information from someone who has lived with this specific cat day to day, is actual, reliable data about who this cat already is, rather than a hopeful prediction about who a kitten might become. This connects directly back to the foster-to-adopt comparison we covered earlier in this series, and it is precisely why that extended observation period matters so much for rescue adoptions specifically. There is also a meaningful practical advantage that gets overlooked amid the emotional weight of unknown history, which is that adult cats require dramatically less hands-on developmental effort than kittens do. There is no critical socialization window still in progress that you need to actively manage. There is no litter box training still underway. There is no redirecting of normal but destructive kitten energy toward appropriate outlets. What you are managing instead is a period of trust building and adjustment to your specific household, which, while it requires patience, does not carry the same intensive day-to-day developmental responsibility that raising a kitten well requires. There is a health dimension to this comparison worth addressing directly, since it is a genuine practical difference rather than an emotional or behavioral one. A kitten obtained from a reputable breeder or a well-documented foster litter typically comes with a much clearer medical history, known vaccination status, known exposure to littermates and parent cats, known genetic background if the breed is documented, which allows your veterinarian to build a proactive health plan from day one. A rescue cat with unknown history, particularly one who came from a stray situation rather than a surrendered pet with prior veterinary records, often requires a more thorough initial veterinary workup, full blood work, parasite screening, dental assessment, and sometimes age estimation based on dentition and physical development, since the exact birth date is genuinely unknown. This is not a reason to avoid adopting a rescue cat, but it is a real, practical difference in what the first several weeks of care will involve, and budgeting for a more comprehensive initial veterinary visit is a reasonable expectation to set going in. There is also a specific behavioral pattern worth understanding if you do adopt an adult rescue cat with unknown history, sometimes called the shutdown period by shelter and rescue workers. Many rescue cats, particularly those coming directly from a shelter environment rather than a foster home, spend their first several days to weeks in a new home in a notably withdrawn, cautious state, hiding frequently, eating minimally, showing little of what will eventually become their genuine personality. This is not necessarily a sign that the placement is failing or that the cat is fundamentally fearful. It is frequently a normal temporary adjustment response to the accumulated stress of shelter life followed by yet another environmental transition. And cat behaviorists commonly observe a meaningful personality shift, sometimes described informally as the cat coming out of their shell, somewhere between the 2 and 6 week mark as they build enough trust in the new environment's stability to relax their guard. Understanding this pattern in advance helps prevent the common mistake of concluding too early that a quiet, withdrawn rescue cat's initial presentation represents their permanent personality, when in many cases it simply reflects the accumulated stress of a journey that is not yet resolved into settled trust. If you are evaluating a specific rescue cat with unknown history during the adoption process itself, there are a few practical things worth paying attention to beyond simply how the cat behaves in a single brief meeting. Ask the shelter or rescue staff directly about any behavioral notes accumulated during the cat's time in their care, not just at intake, but across their full stay, since a cat's behavior often shifts meaningfully the longer they are in a stable foster or shelter environment compared to their behavior on the day they first arrived. Ask specifically whether the cat has been fostered in a home environment at any point, since home-fostered cats typically offer far more reliable behavioral information than cats who have only been observed in a shelter kennel setting, for exactly the reasons we discussed in the foster-to-adopt comparison earlier in this series. There is one more thing worth saying honestly about this comparison, because it goes beyond the practical trade-offs and speaks to something a lot of rescue adopters describe after the fact. Many owners who have raised kittens and also adopted adult rescue cats with unknown histories describe the bonding process with a rescue cat as carrying a distinct emotional weight. Watching a cat who arrived guarded and uncertain gradually choose to trust, seeking out affection they were not initially willing to accept, is an experience that unfolds differently than the bond built with a kitten who trusted you from the very beginning simply because they never knew anything else. This is not a reason to prefer one path over the other, since both produce genuinely meaningful relationships, but it is worth knowing, going in, that the emotional arc of building trust with a previously uncertain adult cat is its own distinct and, for many owners, deeply rewarding experience, rather than simply a lesser version of the immediate bond a kitten offers. The honest way to compare these two paths is not to ask which one guarantees a better outcome, because neither one does. It is to ask which type of uncertainty and which type of effort matches your specific household and your specific capacity right now. Raising a kitten means accepting the uncertainty of how a developing temperament will unfold in exchange for direct influence over that development and the higher energy demands of the early months. Adopting an adult rescue cat with unknown history means accepting a different kind of uncertainty, incomplete information about their past, in exchange for meeting an already formed temperament you can observe directly and a generally lower day-to-day developmental workload. If you have young children who need a cat with an already demonstrated tolerance for boisterous handling, a well-documented adult rescue cat, ideally observed extensively in a foster home with children present, actually gives you more reliable information than a kitten whose eventual tolerance for that kind of handling remains genuinely unknown at the point of adoption. If you specifically want the experience of shaping a cat's development from the earliest possible age, or if you have an existing pet whose introduction needs are easier to manage with a smaller, less established newcomer, a kitten may be the better fit for your household's specific needs. Whichever path you choose, the same principle that has run through this entire series applies here too. Genuine information, whether that is careful kitten socialization records or detailed foster behavioral history for a rescue, reduces uncertainty far more effectively than assumptions based on category alone. A kitten is not automatically a safer bet simply because their history started with you, and a rescue cat is not automatically a riskier bet simply because part of their history remains unknown. The specific cat in front of you and the actual information available about who they are right now matters more than which category they fall into. Number 15, the final comparison in this part. Cat insurance wellness, add-on versus basic accident and illness-only coverage. We touched on pet insurance briefly all the way back in part 1 of this series, but the decision is not a one-time choice you make and forget. It evolves as your cat ages, and the specific question of whether to add wellness coverage on top of your base policy deserves its own dedicated look, because this is where a lot of owners either overspend on coverage they will rarely use or underspend and miss out on the coverage that would have actually saved them money. Let's start with basic accident and illness coverage, since this is the foundational tier that most cat insurance policies are built around, and understanding exactly what it covers and what it does not is essential before we talk about whether the wellness add-on is worth layering on top. Accident and illness coverage is designed specifically for the unpredictable, often expensive medical events we have discussed throughout this series. The urinary blockage requiring emergency surgery, the ingested foreign object requiring an operation, a cancer diagnosis requiring extended treatment. These are the events that can generate veterinary bills running into the thousands of dollars with little to no warning. And this is precisely the category of financial risk that insurance, as a concept, exists to protect against. The core value proposition of accident and illness coverage is straightforward. You pay a predictable monthly premium in exchange for protection against an unpredictable, potentially catastrophic expense. For the majority of cat owners, this base coverage represents the most cost-effective use of an insurance budget because it protects against genuinely large, hard-to-plan-for expenses rather than smaller, predictable costs you could reasonably budget for directly. Now let's look at what a wellness add-on actually provides, since this is a meaningfully different category of coverage that gets bundled alongside base policies by many insurers. Wellness add-ons typically cover routine, predictable care, annual vaccinations, routine blood work, dental cleanings, flea and heartworm prevention, and sometimes spay or neuter costs if your cat has not already been altered. This is fundamentally different from accident and illness coverage because you are not insuring against an unpredictable risk. You are essentially prepaying for expenses you already know are coming, on a schedule you can largely predict in advance. This distinction matters enormously for whether a wellness add-on actually represents good value for your specific situation. Because these are predictable, routine expenses rather than unpredictable risks, the math on wellness add-ons works out favorably only in fairly specific circumstances, and it is worth doing the actual arithmetic rather than assuming the add-on is automatically worthwhile, simply because the coverage sounds appealing on paper. Here is how to think about that arithmetic honestly. Add up what your cat's routine, annual care actually costs at your specific veterinarian, the annual wellness exam, core vaccinations, any routine blood work your vet recommends for your cat's age and health status, and flea and parasite prevention if you use a veterinary dispensed product rather than an over-the-counter option. Compare that total to the additional monthly premium the wellness add-on would cost you across a full year. In many cases, particularly for younger, healthy cats with modest routine care needs, the wellness add-on premium ends up costing close to, or sometimes more than, simply paying for that routine care directly out of pocket, which means the insurance company is not providing meaningful savings. They are essentially providing a forced savings plan with their own administrative costs layered on top. Where the wellness add-on genuinely starts to make more sense is for cats whose routine care needs are more extensive than the baseline. Senior cats who benefit from twice-yearly wellness visits and more frequent blood work, as we discussed in an earlier part of this series, generate routine costs that climb closer to, or sometimes past, what a wellness add-on premium would cost, narrowing or eliminating the gap that makes basic accident and illness alone the better value for a younger, lower-maintenance cat. Cats with chronic conditions requiring regular monitoring blood work, even conditions that do not rise to the level of a covered illness claim under your base policy, can also shift this calculation, since routine monitoring costs accumulate meaningfully over a year in ways that a healthy young adult cat's routine care simply does not. There is also a behavioral economics dimension worth being honest about, one that insurance companies understand well and that genuinely affects real-world outcomes regardless of what the strict math suggests. Owners who have wellness coverage already paid for through their premium are measurably more likely to actually follow through on recommended preventive care, annual blood work, dental cleanings, rather than delaying or skipping these visits when they would otherwise represent an additional out-of-pocket expense at the time of the appointment. If you know honestly that you tend to delay routine veterinary care when it requires an additional payment, decision in the moment, a wellness add-on that has already been paid for through your monthly premium can function as a genuinely useful behavioral commitment device, even if the strict cost comparison suggests you are not saving money in a narrow accounting sense. There is one category worth flagging as a clear case where the wellness add-on tends to make strong financial sense regardless of your cat's age or health status, and that is dental cleaning specifically. Professional dental cleanings under anesthesia are one of the more expensive routine procedures in cat care. And given how common dental disease is, as we discussed earlier in this series, a wellness add-on that includes dental coverage often pays for itself through this single benefit alone if your cat needs even one professional cleaning during the coverage period, which the majority of adult cats eventually do. There is a timing consideration worth understanding before you make this decision, one that applies regardless of which coverage tier you choose. Most cat insurance policies, both base accident and illness coverage, and any wellness add-on, come with waiting periods after you first enroll, typically a shorter window for accidents and a longer window for illnesses, during which claims are not yet payable. This means insurance decisions are best made proactively, while your cat is young and healthy rather than reactively, once a health concern has already emerged, since any condition that shows symptoms or gets diagnosed before or during the waiting period, or in some cases even before the policy start date at all, will typically be excluded as a pre-existing condition for the life of that policy. This is precisely why the general recommendation across the pet insurance industry is to enroll as early as possible in a cat's life, ideally as a healthy kitten or young adult, since waiting until a health concern has already appeared closes off insurance as a viable financial protection tool for that specific condition permanently, regardless of which insurer or tier you eventually choose. It is also worth understanding how premiums typically behave over your cat's lifetime, since the calculation we have been discussing is not static. Most insurers increase premiums as a cat ages, sometimes substantially, reflecting the genuinely higher claims risk associated with senior cats. This means the accident and illness versus wellness add-on decision is worth revisiting periodically rather than treating your initial enrollment choice as permanent. A wellness add-on that did not make financial sense when your cat was a healthy 2-year-old may make considerably more sense once your cat reaches the senior years and their actual routine care costs climb closer to what the add-on premium costs. And conversely, some owners find that as base premiums climb with age, it becomes worth shopping around or reassessing whether the overall policy structure still represents the best value compared to self-funding a dedicated emergency fund instead. There is also a structural detail about how most cat insurance actually works that is worth understanding, regardless of which coverage tier you choose, since it affects your cash flow planning even when the coverage itself is a good value. The overwhelming majority of pet insurance policies operate on a reimbursement model rather than a direct pay model, meaning you pay your veterinarian the full bill up front at the time of treatment and then submit a claim to be reimbursed by your insurer afterward, typically within a week or two, depending on the insurer's processing time. This is a meaningfully different experience than human health insurance, where the insurer often pays the provider directly, and it means that even with excellent coverage, you need to have the funds available to cover the full veterinary bill at the time of an emergency, with insurance functioning as a reimbursement mechanism, rather than eliminating the need for immediate cash availability. This does not change the fundamental value calculation between accident and illness coverage and a wellness add-on, but it is worth factoring into your broader financial planning around your cat's care, since insurance alone, without some accessible funds set aside, does not fully solve the immediate cash flow challenge an emergency veterinary bill presents. Finally, it is worth comparing quotes across at least 2 or 3 different insurers before settling on a policy, since the actual pricing, coverage details, and wellness add-on structure vary meaningfully between companies in ways that can shift the calculation we have walked through here. Some insurers structure their wellness add-on as much better value than others for the exact same routine care needs, and taking the time to compare actual quotes for your specific cat's age, breed, and location, rather than assuming all pet insurance products are functionally interchangeable, is a worthwhile step before committing to either the base coverage alone or the base coverage with a wellness add-on layered on top. So how should you actually decide whether the wellness add-on is worth it for your specific cat? Start by getting an honest total of what your cat's actual routine annual care costs at your veterinarian, not a rough guess, an actual itemized estimate from your vet's office. Compare that total directly against the added annual cost of the wellness add-on premium. If your cat is young, healthy, and has modest routine needs, and if you are someone who reliably follows through on preventive care, regardless of whether it is prepaid, basic accident and illness coverage alone, with routine care paid directly out of pocket, is very likely the better financial choice. And you can redirect the premium savings toward a dedicated emergency fund that gives you the same protection accident and illness coverage provides without the ongoing cost of a policy you may never need to claim against. If your cat is a senior with more extensive routine monitoring needs, has a chronic condition requiring regular blood work, or if dental cleanings are a near certainty over the coverage period, or if you know honestly that prepaid coverage is what actually gets you to follow through on preventive care, rather than delaying it, the wellness add-on is likely to represent genuinely good value and is worth the additional premium cost. Either way, do the actual arithmetic specific to your cat and your veterinarian's pricing before deciding, rather than assuming the answer based on how appealing the coverage sounds in the insurer's marketing materials, since the right answer here genuinely varies from one cat and one household to the next in a way that a blanket recommendation cannot capture. 15 comparisons down, and if you have made it this far, you are exactly the kind of cat owner this channel was built for. Someone who does not settle for the easy assumption when the actual evidence points somewhere more useful. Let's take stock of what we covered today. We started with the comparison so many of you have been asking for, male versus female cats, not as a quick footnote, but as the full, dedicated breakdown it deserved. We looked at one-person cats versus family cats, and why understanding your own cat's attachment style before frustration sets in can change how you interpret behavior you might otherwise take personally. We compared cat wheels and puzzle feeder circuits, because burning energy and engaging the mind are not the same problem, and they do not have the same solution. We walked through boarding facilities against in-home pet sitters and harness walking against catio access, two decisions that come down to the same underlying question: how much territorial disruption is your specific cat actually built to handle? We covered foster to adopt versus direct adoption, because information protects both you and the cat long before any bond is finalized. We looked at calming diffusers and calming supplements, two tools that solve different problems even though they sit on the same shelf. We compared smart litter boxes to traditional ones and seasonal shedding brushes to dedicated de-shedding tools, the kind of practical, everyday decisions that do not get talked about enough given how much they actually affect your daily life together. We walked through moving house and welcoming a new baby, two of the biggest disruptions a cat's world can face, and why preparation beats improvisation every single time. We looked at working from home against being away all day and found that neither one wins by default, only by how deliberately you fill the gaps each one creates. We compared rescue cats with unknown histories against kittens raised from birth, and hopefully put to rest some of the unfair assumptions that unknown history automatically means a harder road. And we closed with the insurance question that never really gets a final answer, because it changes as your cat ages right alongside them. 15 comparisons, and if you go back through this series from the very beginning, that puts us well past 100 decisions covered across every part we have published. That is not a number I am mentioning to impress you. I am mentioning it because it means that whatever specific situation you are facing with your own cat right now, there is a genuine chance we have already worked through the evidence together somewhere in this series, and it is all sitting there in the video descriptions waiting for you. If today's video helped you see a decision differently, or if you caught yourself nodding along at the male versus female comparison, because you have lived exactly what we described, do us a favor and drop a comment telling us which one hit closest to home. We read every single one, and honestly, some of the best ideas for future comparisons in this series have come directly from what you have shared in the comments. And if you are managing an older cat, or you are thinking ahead to the senior years your cat will eventually reach, our ebook, Emergency First Aid for Senior and Disabled Indoor Cats, walks you through exactly what to do in the moments that matter most. the kind of information you want to already know before an emergency happens, rather than scrambling to find it in the middle of one. You will find it linked below. If you are new here, hit subscribe, because this channel puts out content like this every single week. And if you have been with us through all 15 parts of this series so far, thank you genuinely for sticking with us through what has become one of the most complete cat care resources on this platform. We are not done yet. There are more decisions still to cover, and we will see you in the next one.